My son sued me for my own company in court. His lawyer, a man I had called my brother for 30 years, mocked my case and called me senile in front of a packed room. They sat there, smug and comfortable in suits I had paid for, thinking the old man was finally out of the game. I gave a cold smile. When I finally said those 3 simple words, their confident grins turned into sheer horror. But before I tell you how I dismantled their entire lives without raising my voice, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that loyalty is a currency that should never be devalued. My name is Ray Bishop. I am 72 years old, and I have spent the last 40 years building Bishop Logistics from a single rusted Ford truck into an empire that moves freight across 48 states. I survived the race riots of the 60s, 2 tours in Vietnam, and the recessions that swallowed lesser men whole. I thought I had seen the worst of humanity until I looked across the aisle in Superior Courtroom 4B and saw my only son Damon sitting next to the man who was trying to bury me. The mahogany table felt cold under my calloused hands. I sat alone. No counsel, no entourage. Just me, and a lifetime of hard work that was currently being dissected like a frog in a biology class. Gerald Carlson stood up. He adjusted his silk tie, the one I knew cost $400 because I was the one who bought it for him last Christmas. Gerald had been my corporate attorney since the days we operated out of a garage. He was the godfather to my son. Now, he was the executioner. Your Honor. Gerald began, his voice smooth as oil. The evidence is irrefutable. Mr. Raymond Bishop is suffering from advanced cognitive decline. His recent decisions have been erratic, dangerous, and detrimental to the financial health of Bishop Logistics. We are asking the court to grant immediate conservatorship to his son Damon Bishop to prevent the total collapse of the company. I looked at Damon. My boy. He was 42 years old, wearing a navy blue bespoke suit that fit him perfectly, yet he looked small. He stared intently at the polished tips of his Italian leather shoes, refusing to meet my gaze. He was trembling slightly. Beside him sat Tiffany, his wife. My daughter-in-law. She was the only one in that trio who looked comfortable. She leaned back in her chair, scrolling through something on her phone, occasionally glancing at me with a look that wasn't pity. It was hunger. She looked at me the way a vulture looks at a stumbling gazelle. Gerald walked to the center of the room. He did not look at me either. He knew better. We have a recording, Gerald announced. It was taken last Tuesday evening at the Capitol Grill. It clearly demonstrates Mr. Bishop's confusion and admission of incapacity. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. I closed my eyes. I remembered that dinner. Damon had called me saying he wanted to treat me to a steak. He said he missed his dad. I was so happy I canceled a meeting with my fleet managers. I put on my Sunday best. The recording crackled to life. Dad, you look exhausted. Damon's voice on the tape was dripping with fake concern. You are forgetting things. You forgot my birthday last month. Then my voice came through the speakers. It sounded weary. It sounded old. I am tired, Damon. Lord knows I am tired. Sometimes I look at all those trucks and I just want to stop. I just want to lay it all down and rest. Gerald stopped the recording. You heard it. Your Honor, Gerald said, turning to the judge. He wants to stop. He is admitting he cannot handle the pressure, but he refuses to step down. This is not just stubbornness. It is dementia. He forgets crucial shipping contracts. He forgets compliance meetings. If we do not intervene, Bishop Logistics will be bankrupt in 6 months. Lies. All of it calculated, venomous lies. I did not forget his birthday. I was at the cemetery that day visiting his mother's grave because it was the anniversary of the day we bought our first house. Damon knew that. He just didn't care. And yes, I was tired at that dinner. I had just driven 12 hours straight to deliver a load personally because one of my drivers had a family emergency and I covered his shift. That is how I run my company. I lead from the front. But in this sterile room, stripped of context, my exhaustion was painted as senility. I looked at Tiffany again. She whispered something in Damon's ear and placed a hand on his shoulder. It looked like a gesture of support, but I knew better. It was a grip of control. Tiffany had never liked me. To her, I was just the old black man who smelled like diesel fuel and refused to die fast enough. She wanted the penthouse in Manhattan. She wanted the summers in the Hamptons. She wanted the CEO title for her husband so she could be the CEO's wife, The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at me. "Mr. Bishop, do you have a response? You are representing yourself today." I stood up. My knees popped, a reminder of years jumping out of truck cabs. I buttoned my jacket. "Your Honor," I said, my voice deep and steady, filling the room without the need for a microphone. "I built this company with a map and a prayer. I know every bolt in every engine of my fleet. My son says I am forgetting things. The only thing I forgot was to teach him that a man does not stab his father in the back for a paycheck." "Objection," Gerald shouted. "Irrelevant." "Sustained," the judge said, though her eyes lingered on me for a second longer than necessary. "Mr. Bishop, the court is concerned with the financial stability of the entity and your medical capacity. The plaintiff has submitted 3 affidavits from staff members claiming you have been wandering the warehouse confused. I knew exactly which staff members. The new dispatch manager, Tiffany, had insisted we hire. The accountant who had just bought a new boat on a salary that shouldn't afford it. They had bought everyone. They had been planning this for months while I was out on the road, ensuring they all had bonuses for Christmas." I looked at Gerald. I remembered the day I paid for his law school tuition because his father had passed away broke. I remembered the day I held his firstborn son. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap over the table and shake the honor out of him. But I knew that was exactly what they wanted. An angry black man. An outburst would only prove their point that I was unstable. So I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Those affidavits are fabricated, Your Honor," I said quietly. "Do you have proof?" the judge asked. I did not. Not yet. I had walked into this courtroom thinking the truth was enough. I was naive. In the world of business, the truth is just another asset you can liquidate. The judge sighed. She looked at the clock. Given the evidence presented and the apparent admission of fatigue by the defendant, the court is inclined to issue a temporary emergency order. Damon finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but there was a flicker of relief. Tiffany didn't hide it. She smiled, a full predatory smile that showed her perfect expensive teeth. Effective immediately, the judge banged the gavel, her voice echoing like a gunshot. "All assets of Bishop Logistics, as well as the personal accounts of Mr. Raymond Bishop, are frozen, pending a full competency evaluation. Temporary guardianship is granted to Damon Bishop. Mr. Ray Bishop is ordered to surrender all keys, access cards, and company property to the guardian by 5 p.m. today. Frozen, 40 years of life, 40 years of waking up at 4 in the morning. 40 years of missing anniversaries and school plays to keep the lights on. Gone with the bang of a wooden hammer." I stood there as the courtroom began to shuffle. Gerald was shaking hands with the bailiff. Tiffany was hugging Damon, but her eyes were locked on me. She mouthed something. I read her lips perfectly. Game over. I picked up my old leather briefcase. It was empty. I didn't have papers to shuffle. I walked toward the aisle. Ray Gerald stepped in front of me. He had the nerve to look sad. "It is for your own good, Ray. You need to rest. We will find you a nice facility. The one near the lake is beautiful." I stopped. I looked at this man, who I had trusted with my life. I looked at his $400 tie. "Get out of my way, Gerald." Damon stepped up behind him. "Dad, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just give me the keys to the house. Tiffany and I will move in tonight to make sure you are safe. The house. My house. The house where my wife Beatrice took her last breath. The house where I still kept her perfume on the vanity because I couldn't bear to move it. They weren't just taking the company. They were erasing me." I reached into my pocket. My hand brushed against the heavy brass keyring. The key to the main gate. The key to the office. The key to the home Beatrice and I built. I pulled them out. They jingled in the silent courtroom. Damon reached out his hand, his palm soft and unblemished. I dropped the keys on the floor. "Pick them up," I said. Damon froze. I said, "Pick them up, boy. If you want to be the master, you bow down and take it." Damon hesitated, his face turning red. Tiffany nudged him sharp and hard in the ribs. He bent down. He scrambled on the floor of the courtroom, gathering the keys at my feet like a beggar. I stepped over him. I walked past Tiffany, who wrinkled her nose as if I carried a disease. "This isn't over, old man," she whispered as I passed. "We are just getting started." I didn't look back. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the courthouse was stale, recycled dead. I walked to the elevator, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't scared of losing the money. I had been poor before. I knew how to be poor. I was scared because for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do next. I walked out of the building and into the blinding afternoon sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it. A notification from my bank. Account frozen. Contact administrator, another notification. Credit card declined at recurring payment. Beatrice Bishop Memorial Scholarship Fund. They had cut off my wife's charity. That was the moment the sadness died. That was the moment the grief evaporated. Standing there on the concrete steps, watching the city traffic crawl by, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. It was a familiar feeling. It was the same feeling I had in the jungles of Vietnam when the enemy was closing in. It was the clarity of survival. They thought they had stripped me naked. They thought they had taken my weapons. But they had made a fatal mistake. They forgot that I was the one who built the castle they were trying to occupy, and I knew where all the structural weaknesses were. I wasn't going to get a lawyer to fight this. I didn't need a defense. I needed an offense. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a folded, crinkled business card I had carried for 5 years. It wasn't a high-powered attorney. It wasn't a politician. It was the number of a woman who owed me a favor, a woman who knew how to fight in the mud because I was the one who pulled her out of it. I dialed the number. "Maya," I said when she answered. "It's Ray. I hope you are not busy. I need to start a war." The taxi ride from the courthouse to my estate in the hills took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence where the driver, a young man with a heavy accent, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. He probably wondered why a man in a $3,000 custom suit looked like he had just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. I stared out the window as the familiar streets of my neighborhood rolled by. I knew every pothole, every turn, every oak tree lining the boulevard. I had paved some of these roads myself back in my contracting days. I had paid for the streetlights in this gated community. It was my kingdom. Or at least it had been until a judge signed a piece of paper an hour ago. When the taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Bishop estate, I reached for my wallet to pay the fare. My hands were steady, but my chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. I tapped the code into the keypad. 1972, the year I married Beatrice. The gate didn't move. I tried again. 1972. Nothing. A small red light blinked rapidly, mocking me. Access denied. I stepped out of the taxi, telling the driver to wait. I walked up to the pedestrian gate. My key, the master key I had carried on my belt loop for 20 years, slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. It hit a wall of resistance. They hadn't just changed the codes, they had physically replaced the cylinders. In 1 hour. They must have had a locksmith on standby the moment the gavel fell. The efficiency of their betrayal was almost impressive. Then I saw the flashing lights. A police cruiser was parked in my driveway, the blue and red lights bouncing off the wet pavement of the circular drive. And standing next to it under a large black umbrella held by a private security guard was Tiffany. She wasn't wearing her courtroom clothes anymore. She had changed into casual wear yoga pants and a designer hoodie as if she had just finished a relaxing afternoon at the spa. She looked at home. My home. I pushed against the gate, rattling the iron bars. Tiffany saw me. She didn't flinch. She just tapped the officer on the shoulder and pointed in my direction. The officer, a bulky man with a buzz cut, walked down the driveway toward the gate. He opened it from the inside with a remote I had never seen before. "Sir," the officer said, stepping in front of me as I tried to walk through. "You need to halt right there, officer," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. "I am Ray Bishop. This is my house. I built it. I own the deed. I am going inside to get a glass of water and sit in my favorite chair." The officer shook his head, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "I am sorry, Mr. Bishop. I have seen the court order. The property is currently under the guardianship of your son, Damon Bishop, and since the court has deemed you mentally unstable, the guardian has requested that you be removed from the premises for your own safety, my own safety." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked past the officer's shoulder. Tiffany was walking toward us, the heels of her boots clicking on the stone pavers. She stopped 5 feet away, safely behind the wall of the law. "You shouldn't have come back here, Ray," she said. Her voice was light, almost conversational. "It upsets the staff. We had to let Maria go, by the way. She was crying too much about you leaving. It was creating a negative environment." "You fired the housekeeper?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I was fighting to suppress. "Maria has been with us for 15 years. She nursed Beatrice when she was dying. She was overhead." Tiffany shrugged. And she was loyal to the wrong administration. We are modernizing the household staff. She snapped her fingers. The security guard, a man half my age with muscles that looked like they came from a bottle of steroids, stepped forward. He was holding a bag. It wasn't my leather weekender. It wasn't my hard-shell suitcase. It was an old green canvas duffel bag. I recognized it immediately. It was the bag I used to keep in the trunk of my car for emergencies, usually filled with jumper cables and oil rags. "Here," Tiffany said as the guard tossed the bag at my feet. It landed with a wet thud on the asphalt. "I packed for you. I grabbed some underwear, your blood pressure medication, and those plaid shirts you insist on wearing. You won't need suits where you are going." "Where I am going is my bedroom, Tiffany," I said, taking a step forward. The officer put a hand on my chest. "Don't do it, sir. Do not make me arrest you for trespassing on your own property. The order is specific. You are to vacate immediately." Tiffany smiled a tight, cruel expression that didn't reach her eyes. "We made a reservation for you at Sunnyvale. It is fully paid for the first month. After that, well, we will review your behavior. If you are compliant, maybe Damon will authorize an allowance." I looked at the house. The lights were on in the living room. I could see shadows moving inside. They were already rearranging the furniture. They were already scrubbing away the memory of me. My eyes drifted to the garage. The door was open. My 1968 Cadillac DeVille, pristine white with red leather interior, sat there gleaming under the garage lights. That car was the first thing I bought when the company made its first million. Beatrice and I used to drive it down to the coast every Sunday. I stepped toward the garage. Ah. Tiffany wagged her finger like she was scolding a toddler. "Not the car, Ray. Damon has always loved that Cadillac. He thinks it will look great parked in front of the new downtown office. Besides, the judge revoked your license, remember? You are a danger on the road." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the keys to the Cadillac. My keys. The keychain was a small silver angel Beatrice had given me. Tiffany twirled it around her finger, the angel spinning in a blur. "That's my wife's keychain," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "It is company property now, Ray. Everything is company property. And since Damon is the acting CEO, it is his." She turned to the officer. "Is he leaving, or do we need to call backup?" The officer looked at me, his eyes softening slightly. He knew this was wrong. I could see it in his face. He was probably a son too. But he had a badge and a mortgage and orders to follow. "You have to go, Mr. Bishop," he whispered. "Please. Don't let her see you in handcuffs. Don't give her the satisfaction." He was right. If I fought now, I would spend the night in a cell, and tomorrow the headlines would read, "Senile Tycoon Assaults Cop." I would play right into their narrative. I looked down at the green duffel bag in the mud. This was it. 72 years of life reduced to a bag of dirty laundry and a sidewalk. I bent down. My knees screamed in protest, but I didn't grunt. I grabbed the handle of the bag. It was light. Too light. She probably hadn't even packed my toothbrush. I stood up and looked Tiffany dead in the eye. The rain started to fall, then a cold gray drizzle that soaked into my suit instantly. "Enjoy the house, Tiffany," I said. "It has a lot of ghosts, and they don't like strangers." She laughed, a hollow sound. "I don't believe in ghosts, Ray. I believe in real estate. Now get off my driveway." I turned around. I walked back to the waiting taxi, but the driver shook his head. "I am sorry, boss," the driver said, looking at his phone. "I just got a notification. Your credit card on file was declined for the previous ride. I can't take you anywhere unless you have cash." I reached into my pocket. My wallet was there, but my cards were useless plastic. I had $40 in cash, enough for a burger, not a ride to the other side of the city. "I understand," I said. I closed the taxi door. The driver looked guilty, but he drove away, leaving me standing alone in the rain outside the gate of the mansion I paid for. Tiffany and the officer watched from the dry safety of the porch. She wanted to see me break. She wanted to see me beg for a ride or cry or start walking aimlessly down the road so she could film it and show the judge how confused I was. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. I stood straight. I adjusted my wet collar. I would not give her that footage. I walked down the street away from the house, moving with a steady military rhythm. Left, right, left, right. The rain grew heavier, plastering my gray hair to my skull. I walked until I was out of sight of the cameras at the gate. I walked until I found a bus stop bench under a flickering street lamp. I sat down. I was shivering not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. I was homeless. I was broke. I was legally incompetent. I opened the duffel bag to see what she had actually left me. A pair of torn boxers, a single shoe, and a stack of brochures for funeral homes. I chuckled. It started as a low rumble in my chest and turned into a dark, jagged laugh. Funeral homes. She was subtle as a brick. I reached into the hidden compartment of my wallet. I bypassed the frozen credit cards and the photo of Beatrice. I pulled out a small, tattered piece of paper. The ink was faded, but the number was still legible. It was a number I hadn't called in 10 years, a number for people who had fallen off the map. I walked to the payphone at the corner gas station across the street. I didn't want to use my cell phone. I knew Damon was probably tracking the GPS. I fed my last few quarters into the slot. The phone rang 4 times. Then a voice answered. It wasn't a receptionist. It was a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender. Yeah, I took a deep breath, smelling the ozone of the rain and the diesel of passing trucks. It's Ray Bishop, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Ray Bishop, the voice said, sounding wary. I saw the news. They say you lost your mind. They say you are in a home. They say a lot of things. I replied, watching the rain drip off the rim of the phone booth. I am not in a home. I am on the corner of 5th and Main, and I need a favor. I don't do favors for millionaires, Ray. You know that. I am not a millionaire anymore, I said. Right now I am just a man with a bag of wet clothes and a war to win. The line went silent again. Then I heard the jingle of keys on the other end. Stay there. Give me 20 minutes. And Ray. Yeah, don't die before I get there. I hung up the phone. I leaned against the graffiti-covered glass of the booth. I looked up at the hill where my house stood glowing like a beacon of stolen wealth. Keep the Cadillac, Damon, I whispered to the rain. Keep the house. Keep the money. Because when I am done with you, the only thing you will own is the regret of the day you decided to underestimate your father. The neon sign outside my window buzzed with a sound like an angry hornet. The Starlight Motel was the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be found, or when the world had decided you no longer mattered. I sat on the edge of the mattress, which sagged in the middle like a hammock. The sheets smelled of industrial bleach and old cigarettes. I had $40 left in my pocket after paying for 2 nights up front. No ID required. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass hadn't even looked up from his magazine when I slid the crumpled bills across the counter. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest felt like it was wrapped in barbed wire. A sharp squeezing pain radiated down my left arm. I reached into my jacket pocket for my nitroglycerin pills, the ones I had taken every day since my first scare 5 years ago. My hand grasped nothing but lint. Tiffany hadn't just taken my house keys, she had kept my medication. That green duffel bag was empty of the one thing that kept my heart beating rhythmically. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the peeling wallpaper. So this is how it ends, I thought. Not in a boardroom, not surrounded by family, but in a $12 a night room clutching my chest while my son popped champagne in my living room. The irony was bitter. I had spent a lifetime moving cargo, ensuring that vital supplies reached hospitals and schools on time, yet here I was unable to deliver life-saving medicine to myself. A siren wailed in the distance, getting louder then fading away. I wondered if I should call 911. But what would happen? They would see a confused old man with no ID and a heart condition. They would run my name. They would see the court order. They would call Damon, and I would wake up in that facility at Sunnyvale, sedated and silenced forever. No, I would rather die in this motel room than wake up in their cage. Then there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp, distinct raps, not the heavy pound of the police, not the tentative scratch of room service. I sat up, ignoring the throb in my chest. I grabbed the heavy glass ashtray from the bedside table. I gripped it like a brick. Who is it? I growled. Ray, it's Maya. Open up. I exhaled. The tension in my shoulders dropped an inch. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Maya stood there, framed by the flickering hallway light. She was 30 years old, dressed in a sharp gray pantsuit that looked out of place in this neighborhood. She had her father's eyes, determined, fierce. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since the funeral, but she looked exactly like the little girl who used to do homework in the break room while her dad drove the night shift. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She looked at my pale face, then at the empty table. She stepped inside, locking the door behind her. She placed a paper bag on the dresser. Pharmacy, she said. I called your doctor, pretending to be your assistant. I told him you dropped your prescription down the sink. I picked up a refill on my way here. She tossed me the bottle. I didn't say thank you. I just popped the cap, slid a pill under my tongue, and waited for the fire in my chest to subside. Maya sat on the only chair in the room, pulling a laptop out of her oversized tote bag. She looked around the dingy room with a critical eye. "It is clean enough," she muttered. "And it is off the grid. Good choice, Ray." "How did you find me?" I asked, the color slowly returning to my vision. "You called my old burner phone number," she said, booting up her computer. "The one I gave you when I was fresh out of law school and terrified of the corporate firms." I traced the payphone location. "I figured you wouldn't walk far in the rain." She turned the laptop screen toward me. "We don't have much time, Ray. Damon's lawyer, Gerald, has filed for an expedited hearing to make the conservatorship permanent. They want to skip the 30-day observation period. They are claiming you are a flight risk and a danger to yourself." "Let them claim it," I said, leaning forward. "I built that company. The bylaws say the founder has veto power." Maya shook her head. Her face was grim. "That is why I am here. It is not about the bylaws anymore. Look at this." She pointed to a spreadsheet on the screen. It was a mess of red numbers and complex wire transfers. "I have a friend in the district attorney's office," Maya explained. "He owes me. I asked him to run a quiet background check on Damon and Tiffany. Not the public records, the deep stuff. The stuff that doesn't show up on a standard credit report." I squinted at the screen. The numbers were staggering. $5 million, I whispered. "That is just the principal," Maya said. "Damon has a gambling problem, Ray. A bad one. He has been flying to private poker games in Macau and Vegas for 2 years. He is in the hole to a syndicate out of Nevada. And they are not the kind of people who send late notices. They send guys with baseball bats. I felt sick. My son wasn't just incompetent. He was compromised." "And Tiffany?" I asked. Maya clicked another tab. "Tiffany is the accelerant. She knows about the debt. Instead of stopping him, she is trying to outrun it. She has maxed out 6 credit cards in your name in the last week alone." But here's the kicker. Maya opened a document that looked like a draft contract. "They are not trying to take over Bishop Logistics to run it, Ray. They have a buyer lined up, a private equity firm known for stripping assets. They are going to sell the company for parts. The fleet, the warehouses, the contracts. They are going to liquidate everything you built for 40 years to pay off a gambling debt and buy a condo in Miami." The room went silent. The buzzing of the neon sign seemed to stop. My legacy. The jobs of 500 people. The scholarship fund for Beatrice. All of it was going to be butchered because my son couldn't walk away from a card table. "It is a robbery," I said, my voice barely audible. "They framed it as a medical intervention. But it is a robbery." "Exactly," Maya said. "And right now, their narrative is winning. They have the judge, they have the medical affidavits, and they have the public sympathy. Poor son taking care of his senile father. If we go into court next week and argue that you are sane, it is your word against 3 doctors on their payroll. We will lose." She closed the laptop and looked at me. "I can try to negotiate, Ray. I can try to get you a settlement. Maybe keep the house and a small stipend if you agree to step down quietly. It might be the safest option." I looked at the pill bottle in my hand. I thought about the officer at my gate. I thought about the smirk on Tiffany's face when she threw my life into the mud. "Negotiate?" I asked. Maya nodded slowly. "It is the logical legal move. Minimize damage." I stood up. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I walked to the window and pulled back the dirty curtain. I looked out at the rain-slicked street. "I paid for your father's back surgery when the insurance company denied him. Didn't I, Maya?" "Yes," she said softly. "You did. You saved his life. And I did it because your father was a fighter. He drove that rig through blizzards because he knew people were counting on him." I turned back to face her. "I am not a victim, Maya. And I am not a senile old man looking for a settlement. I am a Marine, and I am the CEO of Bishop Logistics." I walked over to the table and slammed my hand down on the laminated surface. "They want to sell my company. Let them try. They want to say I am crazy. I will show them what crazy looks like." I looked Maya in the eye. "You are a public defender, Maya. You are used to shielding people. You are used to begging for plea deals." "I do what I have to do," she said, her chin going up. "Well, today, that changes," I said. "I don't need a shield, Maya. and I definitely don't need a defense. I picked up the laptop and turned it back toward her. I need a sword. We are not going to prove I am sane. We are going to prove they are criminals. We are going to find every dirty dollar, every secret email, and every lie they have told. We are going to let them think they have won. We are going to let them sit on that throne until the very last second. And then Maya asked, a small smile playing on her lips. And then I said, grabbing my jacket, we are going to burn the throne down with them sitting on it. Get your coat, counselor. We have work to do. The warehouse of Bishop Logistics at 3 a.m. was a living, breathing beast. Even from the parking lot, I could hear the low rumble of idling diesel engines and the rhythmic beep of forklifts reversing in the loading bays. This was the heartbeat of my life for 4 decades. I knew every crack in the concrete and every flicker of the sodium floodlights. I pulled my collar up against the wind. I wasn't entering through the front glass doors where the receptionist used to greet me with black coffee. I walked around to the maintenance bay near the mechanic shop. There was a service door there that always had a faulty latch if you jiggled it just right. I had meant to fix it for years, but I never got around to it. Tonight, that procrastination was my salvation. I slipped inside. The smell hit me instantly. A mix of oil exhaust fumes and stale coffee. It was the smell of hard work. It was the perfume of my empire. I moved through the shadows, staying clear of the main corridors. I wasn't just hiding from the security cameras. I was hiding from the shame. I didn't want my drivers, the men and women whose kids I had put through college, to see me sneaking around like a thief in the house I built. My destination was the executive suite on the 2nd floor. Specifically, the wall safe behind the portrait of the company's first truck. I needed the incorporation papers for Raby Holdings, the documents that proved the separation of assets, the documents that would be my sword. I reached the office door. It was unlocked. That was the first sign of sloppy management. I pushed it open and froze. The office didn't smell like old leather and pipe tobacco anymore. It smelled of vanilla air freshener, cheap and cloying. My mahogany desk was cluttered with takeout boxes and empty champagne bottles. And the portrait of the first truck was gone, replaced by a modern abstract painting that looked like someone had spilled ketchup on a canvas. I stepped into the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I moved toward where the safe should be, looking for this dad. The voice came from the corner shadows. The desk lamp clicked on, blinding me for a second. Damon was sitting in my leather chair. He was wearing a silk robe over his clothes and spinning a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked like a child playing king. "You are predictable, Dad," Damon sneered. "Tiffany said you would come back. She said rats always return to the nest." I stood straight, my military bearing taking over. "I am not a rat, Damon. And this is not a nest. It is a place of business. Or at least it was before you turned it into a fraternity house." Damon stood up, knocking over a stack of files. His eyes were bloodshot. He had been drinking. "It is my business now," he shouted. "The court gave it to me. You are trespassing." He slammed his hand on the intercom button on the desk. "Security to the executive suite. We have an intruder." I didn't run. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a chase. I stood my ground as he walked around the desk, invading my personal space. "You think you are so smart?" He hissed, the smell of expensive scotch on his breath. "You think you can hide assets from me? We found the safe, Dad. We drilled it open yesterday. Empty. Just like your head." He poked me in the chest. I felt a surge of rage so powerful my hands curled into fists. But I didn't strike him. I looked at him with cold pity. "You drilled the decoy safe, Damon. I taught you to look at the surface. I never taught you to look behind the walls." His face contorted in confusion, then anger. Before he could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 uniformed guards burst in. Behind them came a dozen night shift workers, drivers, and loaders who had heard the commotion. Damon's eyes lit up. He finally had his audience. He grabbed my arm and dragged me out onto the mezzanine landing overlooking the warehouse floor. Below us, 50 workers looked up. They stopped their forklifts. They turned off their engines. Silence swept across the facility. "Look at him," Damon shouted, his voice echoing off the metal rafters. "Look at the great Ray Bishop." Damon pointed at me like I was a circus freak. "He is confused, everyone. The dementia has taken over. He broke in here tonight thinking it was 1985. He thinks he still runs this place. He is dangerous. He is a liability." I looked down at the faces of my employees. I saw fear. Not of me, but for me. I saw Big Mike, the foreman who had been with me since the beginning. I saw Sarah from accounting. They looked at me with sorrow. Damon turned to the guards. "Throw him out. And I mean, throw him out. If he resists, tase him." The crowd below gasped. The two guards hesitated. They were young hired contractors from an outside agency. They looked at each other, unsure. "I said move!" Damon screamed, his voice cracking. One guard stepped forward, reaching for my arm. "Don't touch him." The voice was deep and gravelly. It came from the hallway behind us. Joe, the head of night security, stepped into the light. Joe was 65, a Vietnam vet like me. He walked with a limp from a piece of shrapnel in his thigh. He had worked for me for 20 years, guarding this building like it was Fort Knox. Joe stepped between me and the young guards. He put a heavy hand on the chest of the one reaching for me. "You take one more step, son, and you will be eating through a straw," Joe said quietly. Damon turned purple. He marched up to Joe, getting right in his face. "What did you say?" Damon spat. "I said don't touch Mr. Ray," Joe replied calmly. "He is the owner of this company. He is the reason you have a chair to sit in and whiskey to drink. I am not letting you put hands on him." Damon laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "Mr. Ray doesn't sign your paychecks anymore, Joe. I do. I am the CEO, and I am giving you a direct order. Remove this trespasser or you are fired." Joe looked at Damon, then he looked at me. He smiled, a sad, tired smile. He reached up and unclipped his badge. He took off his security hat and placed it gently on the railing. "I don't take orders from boys playing dress-up," Joe said, "and I definitely don't take orders from a son who treats his father like garbage. You don't have to fire me, Damon. I quit." Joe turned to the other workers below. "I am walking out. Who is with me?" There was a murmur in the crowd. People started to move. Damon saw it. Panic flickered in his eyes. He realized he was losing control. "Security!" Damon shrieked at the young contractors. "Get them both out, now, or I will sue your agency for breach of contract. I will ruin you." The young guards looked terrified. They didn't want to be sued. They grabbed Joe by the arms. They grabbed me. I shook them off. "Don't handle me," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the warehouse. "I can walk." I straightened my jacket. I looked at Damon, who was panting heavily, his chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. He thought he had won. He thought he had humiliated me. I took a step closer to him. The guards tensed, but I didn't raise a hand. I just lowered my voice so only he and the silent crowd could hear. "You think you just showed strength, Damon?" I said. Damon smirked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I showed them who is boss." I shook my head slowly. "No, son. You showed them who is a tyrant." I gestured to Joe, who was being escorted out beside me. "You just fired the only man in this building who would have taken a bullet for you because he respected the name on the door. You traded loyalty for obedience." Damon crossed his arms, looking away. "Get out, old man." "I will go," I said. "But remember this moment, Damon. You can buy silence. You can buy muscle, but you cannot buy respect. And when the ship starts to sink, and it will sink, the people you pay to clap for you will be the first ones to steal the lifeboats." I turned and walked toward the stairs. Joe walked beside me, matching my stride. As we descended to the warehouse floor, I expected booing. I expected mockery. Instead, as I walked through the aisle of forklifts and pallets, a strange thing happened. One by one, the workers took off their hard hats. They didn't say a word. They just stood there, holding their hats against their chests in a silent salute. Big Mike nodded at me, tears in his eyes. Sarah touched her hand to her heart. Damon was screaming from the balcony above, telling them to get back to work, telling them he would dock their pay. But his voice was just noise. It bounced off the steel walls and faded into nothing. I walked out of the service door into the cold night air. Joe was right there with me. "Thank you, Joe," I said as we stood in the parking lot. "You didn't have to do that. You have a mortgage." Joe lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. "My mortgage is paid off, Ray," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Besides, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I let that punk handle you." "Where are we going, boss?" I looked at the sunrise starting to bleed purple over the horizon. I didn't have the documents from the safe, but I had something better. I had a witness, and I had the confirmation that Damon was ruling by fear, not competence. "We are going to war, Joe," I said. "But first we need breakfast. I know a diner that opens at 4. Joe chuckled, limping toward his beat-up truck. "You buying?" he asked. I patted my empty pockets. "Not today, old friend. Today you are buying." Joe laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made the night seem a little less dark. "Get in the truck, Ray. Let's go take down an empire." The coffee in the styrofoam cup was cold and tasted like battery acid, but it was the only fuel I had. The clock on the bedside table read 4:17 in the morning. Outside the motel window, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Inside the room, the only sound was the frantic clicking of Maya's laptop keyboard and the rustling of paper as I sifted through boxes of bank statements she had managed to download before they locked us out. My eyes burned. I had been staring at numbers for 6 hours straight, columns of debits and credits, payroll expenses, fuel costs, maintenance fees. To the untrained eye, it looked like the boring anatomy of a logistics company, but to me it looked like a crime scene. I ran a finger down the ledger for the fiscal year of 2018. That was the year profits started to dip. At the time, Gerald had told me it was due to rising fuel prices and new tariffs. I had trusted him. I had just lost Beatrice, and I was too busy grieving to double-check the math. I had let my friends steer the ship while I mourned. I was a fool. "Here it is again," Maya said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "Look at this." She turned the laptop toward me. She highlighted a recurring monthly payment of $45,000 to a vendor called T&G Solutions. "Who are they?" Maya asked. I checked the vendor list. They are categorized as external strategic consultants, but there are no invoices for work done, just wire transfers, every first of the month like clockwork. I squinted at the screen. T&G Solutions. I had never heard of them. I prided myself on knowing every supplier from the tire guys to the vending machine stockists. I didn't pay consultants. I paid drivers. "Trace the LLC," I said, rubbing my temples. "Find out who owns T&G, Maya typed furiously. Her fingers were a blur. She was good. Better than the high-priced associates Gerald kept in his glass tower. "It is a shell company registered in Delaware," she said after a few minutes. "But look at the authorized signatories." She enlarged the document. My heart skipped a beat. The signature was a scribble, but I recognized the handwriting. I had seen it on birthday cards and permission slips for 30 years. Tiffany Bishop. And right below it was the co-signer, Gerald Carlson, T&G. Tiffany and Gerald. They hadn't even been creative enough to hide their names. They were mocking me in the ledger. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. This wasn't just Damon being incompetent. This was a conspiracy. Gerald wasn't just helping my son take over because he thought I was old. He was helping him because he and Tiffany had been bleeding the company dry for 5 years. They were stealing $500,000 a year, I whispered. That is why we couldn't upgrade the fleet in 2019. That is why I had to freeze bonuses last Christmas. I told the drivers times were tough. I looked men in the eye, men with families, and told them the margins were too thin. I slammed my fist onto the rickety table, making the lamp wobble. I lied to my people, Maya. I lied to them because I believed a thief. "Ray, calm down," Maya said, reaching for my hand. "We have them. This is embezzlement. This is fraud." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It is worse than fraud. It is personal." I stood up and paced the small room. The worn carpet felt thin under my feet. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where Joe's truck was parked. Joe was asleep in the cab, keeping watch. Loyalty outside, sleeping in the cold. Treachery inside, living in my mansion. My mind drifted back. Not to the numbers, but to the why. How did I raise a son who would allow this? How did I raise a boy who would marry a woman like Tiffany and let his godfather rob his inheritance? The memory hit me then, sharp and vivid. It was 24 years ago. Damon was 18, he had just graduated high school, and I was so proud I could barely speak. I took him to the main yard on a Saturday morning. I had a brand new Peterbilt truck waiting. It wasn't a gift for him to drive around town. It was a tool. I tossed him the keys. "Get in, son," I had said. "Before you go off to that fancy college, you are going to learn how this business actually works. You are going to do a run with me." Chicago to St. Louis. Damon had looked at the truck with a wrinkled nose. He was wearing brand new white sneakers. Jordans. Expensive. "Dad, it is dirty," he had complained. "The seat is greasy. It is honest grease, Damon," I had told him. "That grease paid for those shoes. That grease is going to pay for your tuition. Get in." He climbed in, but he wouldn't touch anything. He sat with his hands in his lap, afraid to get a speck of dirt on his skin. When we stopped to check a tire, I asked him to help me with the lug nuts. He refused. "I am going to study business management, Dad," he had said, looking down at me while I sweated in the sun. "I am going to be in an office. I am not going to be a mechanic. I am going to own the fleet, not drive it." I should have slapped him then, not to hurt him, but to wake him up. Instead, I just sighed and finished changing the tire myself. I thought he would grow out of it. I thought the world would humble him. But the world didn't humble him. I cushioned him. I let him skip the hard parts. And because he never got his hands dirty, he never learned the value of the things he was holding. He thought ownership was a right, not a responsibility. And now that weakness had opened the door for wolves like Gerald and Tiffany. Maya called me back to the present. "Ray, look at this." I turned back to the table. Maya was no longer looking at the bank statements. She had pulled up the original incorporation documents, the ones we had retrieved from the public records database. "What is it?" I asked. "Gerald filed the motion for conservatorship over Bishop Logistics Incorporated," she said, pointing to the header of the court order. "And he filed for control of all assets held by that entity." "That is standard," I said. "Yes, but look at the asset list attached to the motion," Maya said, her eyes wide. "It lists the trucks, the trailers, the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. It lists everything as property of Bishop Logistics, Inc. So I asked, that is the company." "Is it Ray?" Maya asked. "Think back. 30 years ago when you expanded, you were sued by that driver who fell asleep at the wheel and tried to blame the brakes. I remembered. It was a frivolous lawsuit, but it almost bankrupted me. My insurance premium skyrocketed. After that lawsuit, Gerald told me to restructure," I said. "He said we needed to protect the hard assets from liability." "Exactly," Maya said. "Gerald set up a holding company, Ray B. Holdings." I nodded slowly. The memory was foggy, but it was there. "Ray B. Holdings owns the physical assets," I said. "The trucks, the buildings. Bishop Logistics is just the operating company. It holds the contracts and the payroll. But it leases the equipment from Ray B. Holdings." Maya grinned, a predatory grin that matched my own. "And who is the sole signatory for Ray B. Holdings?" she asked. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the papers I signed 3 decades ago. Gerald had handled it. He had brought me a stack of documents to sign between runs. "Me," I said, opening my eyes. "Just me. Damon was a child. Beatrice wasn't involved in the business side. It is just me." Maya tapped the screen. "And here is the beautiful part, Ray. Gerald got lazy. Or maybe he got arrogant. When he filed the motion yesterday, he only went after Bishop Logistics. He assumed that since you are the owner of both, the control would transfer automatically. But Ray B. Holdings is a separate legal entity. It is not a subsidiary. It is a landlord." I leaned in closer, reading the fine print of the lease agreement Maya had dug up. It was a standard commercial lease. But there was a clause. Clause 14B, termination upon change of control, I read aloud. "The lessor reserves the right to terminate this lease agreement immediately and without penalty if the management of the lessee changes without the prior written consent of the lessor." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest. A laugh that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with survival. "Do you see it?" Maya asked. "I see it," I whispered. "Damon is the new management of Bishop Logistics. He is the lessee. I am Ray B. Holdings. I am the lessor. And I never gave my consent." "Gerald missed it," Maya said. "He was so focused on proving you were incompetent, he forgot to check the foundation of the house he was stealing. He thinks he took the castle. But he only took the flag. You still own the stones." I walked to the dirty mirror hanging on the bathroom door. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired. My eyes were red, my stubble was gray. But the fear was gone. "They want to say I am senile," I said to my reflection. "They want to say I can't run a company." I turned back to Maya. "Draft the letter, Maya." "What letter?" she asked. "The eviction notice," I said. "Tell Bishop Logistics that they are in violation of their lease. Tell them they have 24 hours to return every single truck, every trailer, and the keys to the warehouse." But Maya hesitated. "That will shut down the company. The drivers won't be able to work. The contracts will be breached. It will be chaos." "I know," I said. "It will be nuclear." I sat down on the edge of the bed. Damon thinks he is a CEO, I said. He thinks sitting in the big chair makes him a leader. Well, a leader has to solve problems. Let's see how he solves a fleet that doesn't exist. I looked at the phone. And Maya, yes, Ray, draft a second letter. Send it to the district attorney. Attach the file on T&G Solutions. You are going to turn them in, she asked. Gerald, your friend. I looked at the empty spot on my finger where my wedding ring used to be before my fingers swelled up with arthritis. The ring Beatrice gave me. He is not my friend, I said. Friends don't steal from you while you are grieving your wife. Friends don't call you crazy in front of a judge. I picked up the cold coffee and took a sip. It didn't taste like acid anymore. It tasted like justice. Send it, I said. Burn it down. Maya started typing. The click-clack of the keys sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. Outside, the sun was starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange. I stood up and went to the door. I opened it and stepped out into the morning chill. Joe was awake, wiping the dew off his windshield. He saw me and rolled down the window. You look different, boss, Joe said, squinting at me. You look lighter. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. I am lighter, Joe, I said. I just dropped about 200 pounds of dead weight. Start the truck, Joe. We have a delivery to make. What are we delivering? Joe asked, cranking the engine. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. We are delivering a reality check. I climbed into the passenger seat of Joe's beat-up pickup. As we pulled out of the motel parking lot, I didn't look back at the place where I had spent the lowest night of my life. I looked forward toward the glass tower downtown where Gerald was probably sleeping in his silk sheets, and toward the mansion where Tiffany was probably planning her next shopping spree. They were sleeping. They were dreaming of their victory. Let them sleep. Because when they wake up, they are going to find out that the old lion they tried to put in a cage didn't lose his teeth. He just sharpened them. The diner on 4th Street served coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and bacon that was more grease than meat, but it was the only place in the city where I could hear myself think. I sat in the corner booth with my back to the wall, a habit I picked up in the Marines and never shook. The vinyl seat was cracked and the table wobbled, but for the first time in 48 hours I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Joe was outside in the truck catching a few minutes of sleep. Maya was back at her office drafting the eviction notices that would bring my son's stolen empire to its knees. I was just trying to eat a plate of eggs before the war started. I saw her before she saw me. A silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb, squeezing into a spot between a delivery van and a rusted sedan. The door opened and Tiffany stepped out. She looked like a swan that had landed in a mud puddle. She was wearing a white cashmere coat that cost more than the waitress made in a year and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. She looked at the diner sign with visible disgust before pushing the door open. The smell of her perfume, expensive and floral, hit me before she even reached the table. It overpowered the smell of frying onions. She slid into the booth opposite me, keeping her coat buttoned tight as if she was afraid the poverty of the place might be contagious. "Hello, Ray," she said, removing her sunglasses to reveal perfectly applied makeup. "You are hard to find. Damon is frantic, you know. He thinks you are wandering the streets confused." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I am not wandering, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady. "And I am not confused. I am just eating breakfast. What do you want?" She sighed, placing a manicured hand on the sticky table. She looked at me with that practiced look of concern, the one she used when she wanted me to buy her a new car or fund a vacation. "We want to help you, Ray," she said softly. "This whole situation, it has gone too far. The police, the court orders, the restraining orders. It is ugly. And it is bad for the company's image. Damon is worried about your heart. He cries himself to sleep thinking about you out here all alone." I almost laughed. Damon crying over me. The only thing Damon cried over was a losing hand at a poker table. "Cut the act, Tiffany," I said, putting the cup down. "You didn't come here to check on my heart. You came here because you are scared. You know I am not going to just roll over and die." Tiffany's expression hardened just a fraction. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a sleek leather folder. She slid it across the table. "We have a proposal," she said, her voice losing some of its warmth. "A settlement. We want to do this the easy way, Ray, for everyone's sake." I didn't touch the folder, I just looked at her. "What is in the folder, Tiffany?" She smiled a tight, thin smile. "It is a voluntary transfer of assets," she explained. "If you sign this, you agree that your health prevents you from running the business. You formally hand over the CEO title and the voting rights to Damon. And what do I get? I asked. What is the price of my life's work today? Generosity, she said, leaning back. We will set you up in a private apartment, not a facility, an apartment, with a nurse, and we will give you a stipend, $5,000 a month. Tax-free, $5,000. I built a company that generates $50 million in revenue a year. I have trucks on the road that cost $200,000 each, and she was offering me $5,000 like it was a king's ransom. And my grandson, I asked, what about Marcus? Tiffany paused. She knew this was my weak spot. Marcus was 10 years old. He was the only innocent thing left in this family. He had Beatrice's smile and my stubbornness. If you sign, she said, lowering her voice to a whisper, you can see him. Supervised visits, once a week. We will bring him to the apartment. You can play chess with him. You can tell him your stories. But only if you sign. If you fight us, Ray, well, the court might decide you are too unstable to be around a child. It was blackmail, pure and simple. She was holding my blood hostage. I looked down at my plate. The eggs were cold. You are a cruel woman, Tiffany, I said quietly. I am a pragmatist, Ray, she corrected. I am securing my family's future. Damon is the future. You are the past. It is the natural order of things. You should be grateful. Most men your age are rotting in state homes. We are offering you dignity. Dignity. I looked at her white coat. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger, a ring I had paid for when Damon proposed because he didn't have the credit. I have a question, I said. Ask, she replied, checking her watch. My house, I said. When I left, you were clearing things out. The study, the library. We are redecorating, she said dismissively. It was too dark, too much old wood. We want something modern, minimalist. My wife's record collection, I said, the words catching in my throat. Beatrice's jazz records, the ones in the mahogany cabinet, the original pressings of Miles Davis, the signed Coltrane album. She spent 40 years collecting them. We used to listen to them every Sunday morning. Where are they, Tiffany? Tiffany waved her hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. Oh, those dusty old things, she said. They smelled like mold, Ray. They were making the room smell like a basement. I got rid of them. You got rid of them, I repeated, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Well, I didn't throw them away, she said with a little laugh. I am not wasteful. I sold them. There is a vintage shop downtown that buys junk like that. I got a few thousand for the lot. She patted the leather handbag sitting next to her. It actually covered the tax on this Birkin, she said, beaming. Can you believe it? A bunch of scratched vinyl paid for a bag. I think it is poetic, don't you? Beatrice acts as a down payment for my style. The world stopped. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzling of the grill, it all vanished. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. She sold them. She sold the soundtrack of my marriage. She sold the records Beatrice and I danced to in our living room when we had nothing but love and a roof over our heads. She sold the signed Coltrane album Beatrice had hunted down for 5 years to give me for our 25th anniversary. She sold my heart to buy a purse. The rage didn't come as fire. It came as ice. It started in my gut and shot up to my brain, freezing everything in its path. My vision narrowed until all I could see was Tiffany's smiling, painted face. I didn't make a conscious decision to move. My body simply reacted to the threat. I grabbed the glass of ice water sitting in front of me. Ray, what are you? Tiffany started to say, sensing the shift in the air. I didn't let her finish. I threw the water. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. The ice cubes hit her face with a hard crack. The freezing water soaked her hair, ruined her makeup, and drenched the front of her white cashmere coat. She gasped, shocked into silence. She sat there for a second, blinking water dripping from her nose, her mouth open in a perfect O of disbelief. Then she screamed. "You crazy old lunatic!" she shrieked, jumping up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of every patron in the diner. "Look what you did. This is cashmere. You ruined it." I stood up slowly. I loomed over her. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice was low, deep, and vibrating with the kind of anger that makes grown men step back. "You sold her memories," I said, pointing a finger at her face. "You sold the only thing of value in that house to buy a piece of leather." I slammed my hand down on the table. The plates rattled. The silverware jumped. The waitress who was coming over to intervene stopped dead in her tracks. "You think this is a negotiation, Tiffany?" I snarled. "You think you can buy me off with $5,000 and a visit with my grandson? You think you have won because you have the keys?" I leaned in close enough to smell the wet, expensive wool and the fear coming off her. "You have no idea what you have done. You didn't just wake up a sleeping dog, woman, you kicked a wolf." Tiffany was wiping her face with a napkin, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked like a clown in a horror movie. "I am calling the police," she hissed, her voice shaking. "I am calling Gerald. This is assault. This is proof. We are going to lock you up, Ray. You are never going to see the outside of a cell again. You are going to die in a padded room. Do it," I said, challenging her. "Call them. Tell them I threw water on you. Tell them I am crazy. But while you are dialing, you better ask yourself one question." I picked up the folder she had brought the insulting settlement offer, and I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I threw the confetti of paper at her feet. "Ask yourself who actually owns the ground you are standing on," I said. Tiffany grabbed her bag, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "You are finished, Ray," she spat, backing away. "You are nothing but a sad, lonely old man. And Damon hates you. He hates you for this." She turned and ran out of the diner, her wet coat flapping behind her. She almost tripped in her high heels as she scrambled into her Mercedes. She peeled away from the curb tires, screeching, leaving a cloud of exhaust behind. I stood there breathing heavy, my chest heaving. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, making my hands shake. The diner was silent. Everyone was staring at me. The truck driver at the counter, the young couple in the booth, the cook with the spatula in his hand. I looked at the waitress. She was an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda. She looked at the puddle of water on the floor, then she looked at me. She didn't reach for the phone to call the cops. She reached for the coffee pot. She walked over to my table and refilled my cup. "Sounds like she deserved it, sugar," Brenda said calmly. I sank back into the booth, the energy draining out of me. I looked at the steam rising from the coffee. "She did," I whispered. But as I sat there wiping a splash of water from my own sleeve, I knew that this wasn't a victory. It was just a skirmish. Tiffany was wounded, and a wounded animal is dangerous. She would go back to Damon and Gerald. They would expedite the hearing. They would come for me with everything they had. Let them come. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the flash drive Maya had given me, the drive containing the proof of their theft. "You took her music, Tiffany," I thought, closing my eyes. "You took her jazz. Well, get ready to dance, because the music is about to stop." The second hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday. I walked into the courthouse wearing the same suit I had worn to bury my wife 3 years ago. It was charcoal gray, stiff, and carried the faint scent of cedar and sorrow. Maya walked beside me, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. She carried a single briefcase. I carried nothing but the burning coal of indignation in my chest. We didn't sit in the back this time. We sat right at the front. Across the aisle, the enemy camp was already assembled. Damon was wearing a new watch, a gold Rolex that I knew for a fact he couldn't afford on his salary. Tiffany was whispering in his ear, probably telling him which camera to look at when the verdict came down. And Gerald was organizing a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing to amputate a healthy limb. The judge entered. It was the same judge from the preliminary hearing, Judge Vance. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who wanted to get through her docket so she could go home and forget that families like ours existed. "All rise," the bailiff droned. We sat. The air in the room was thick, charged with static. "Mr. Carlson," the judge said, peering over her spectacles. "You filed an emergency motion to expedite the conservatorship. You claim you have new evidence regarding Mr. Bishop's medical status." "Yes, Your Honor," Gerald said, standing up. He didn't look at me. He looked at the flag in the corner of the room as if he were a patriot doing his civic duty. "Since the last hearing, we have obtained sworn testimony from Dr. Arrington, a neurologist who has treated Mr. Bishop in the past." I froze. Dr. Arrington. I had seen him once 5 years ago for a routine checkup after a minor concussion at the loading dock. I hadn't seen him since. Gerald walked to the bench and handed over a thick file. "This report confirms that Mr. Bishop has been displaying symptoms consistent with early-onset Alzheimer's and vascular dementia for over 18 months, Gerald said. His voice was somber. It is Dr. Arrington's professional opinion that Mr. Bishop's recent erratic behavior firing staff locking himself in motel rooms paranoid outbursts is a direct result of this cognitive decline. Lies. The word exploded in my brain. It wasn't just a fabrication, it was a violation. They were taking my mind, the one tool I had used to build a life out of nothing, and they were declaring it broken. They were weaponizing the natural aging process to strip me of my rights. I stood up. I couldn't help it. The Marine in me reacted to the ambush. "That is a lie," I shouted, my voice booming off the paneled walls. "I haven't seen Arrington in 5 years. How much did you pay him, Gerald? How much did it cost to buy a diagnosis?" "Mr. Bishop," the judge slammed her gavel. "Sit down. He is lying to the court." I pointed a trembling finger at Gerald. "I can recite the VIN numbers of my entire fleet from memory. I can tell you the current price of diesel in 48 states. My mind is sharp." "Sit down, or I will hold you in contempt," the judge warned, her face hardening. I felt a hand on my arm. It was small, but the grip was iron. Maya whispered, pulling me down. "Sit down." I looked at her. Her eyes were intense, focused. She wasn't scared. She was calculating. "Do not let them see you bleed," she hissed. "That is what they want. They want the angry, confused old man. Don't give him to them." I sank back into my chair. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. I looked at Damon. He was staring at the table, his face pale. He knew this was a lie. He knew I was sharp. But he stayed silent. His silence was louder than Gerald's speech. The judge flipped through the medical report. She frowned. "A lie printed on official letterhead looks a lot like the truth to a stranger." "This is very concerning," Judge Vance said. "Dr. Arrington is a respected specialist." She looked at Maya. "Does the defense have a counter-evaluation?" Maya stood up. She was calm. Too calm. "Your Honor, we contest the validity of this report. However, we have not had time to schedule an independent neurological exam given the expedited nature of this hearing." The judge nodded. "In light of this new medical evidence and the potential risk to the company's assets, I am inclined to grant the plaintiff's request." A murmur went through the courtroom. I felt the walls closing in. However, Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. "We propose a compromise." Gerald spun around. "Compromise?" Maya walked to the center of the room. "Mr. Bishop loves his son," she lied smoothly. "And he loves his company. He is willing to step back voluntarily for a period of 30 days. I looked at Maya, shocked. What was she doing? She was surrendering. 30 days. Maya continued. To allow Damon Bishop to demonstrate his leadership capabilities, to allow for a full, independent medical evaluation of my client, and to allow for a proper audit of the company's books. Gerald narrowed his eyes. He smelled a trap, but he couldn't see it. He looked at Tiffany. She nodded eagerly. She didn't care about 30 days. She just wanted the credit card. "We accept," Gerald said quickly. 30 days of temporary conservatorship. Damon Bishop assumes full executive control immediately. The judge banged the gavel. So ordered. Damon Bishop is granted temporary guardianship of the estate and the business entity known as Bishop Logistics for a period of 30 days. Next hearing is set for next month. Court adjourned. It was over. In 10 minutes, I had lost my legal standing as a free man. Damon jumped up and hugged Tiffany. They looked like they had just won the lottery. Gerald was smiling, shaking hands with the bailiff. I sat there feeling the weight of the defeat. Why, I asked Maya. Why did we fold? Maya closed her briefcase. She leaned in close to my ear. Because, Ray, if we fought the medical report today, the judge would have ordered a state evaluation. That takes weeks. In the meantime, the court would have appointed a neutral third party to run the company. A stranger. So I asked. So Maya said, a dark glint in her eye. We need Damon to be in charge. We need him to be the one holding the wheel when the wheels fall off. We just gave him exactly what he wanted. We gave him the title. We stood up and walked toward the exit. Damon blocked our path. He looked taller now, more confident. The power suited him, or so he thought. No hard feelings, Dad, Damon said, offering his hand. It is just business. You will see. I am going to take Bishop Logistics to the next level. We are going to modernize. We are going to rebrand. I looked at his hand. Soft. Manicured. You got what you wanted, son, I said, keeping my hands in my pockets. You are the captain now. Tiffany stepped forward, looping her arm through Damon's. Don't worry, Ray, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. We will make sure the nurse at the apartment is nice. And maybe if you are good, we will bring you some photos of the new office renovation. We are thinking of knocking down your old office wall. Open concept. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had sold my wife's soul for a handbag. You do that, I said. Knock down whatever you want. Gerald walked up, checking his watch. Come on, Damon, he said. We have a board meeting to schedule. We need to sign those transfer documents for the bank. Damon nodded. He looked at me one last time. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt. Fear. It didn't matter. It was too late. Take care of yourself, Dad, he said. They walked away, the three of them, the unholy trinity of my destruction. They walked out of the courtroom doors and into the sunlight laughing. I could hear Tiffany asking about a celebration dinner. I stood in the hallway with Maya. The courthouse was emptying out. They are going to the bank right now, I said, to access the corporate accounts. Let them, Maya said. They are going to the office, I said. To sit in my chair. Let them sit, Maya said. I looked at her. You sent the eviction notice, Maya checked her phone. The courier just delivered it to the front desk of Bishop Logistics, and the second letter to the leasing office of Ray B. Holdings. It is done, Ray. I took a deep breath. So right now Damon is the CEO of a trucking company that doesn't have any trucks. Exactly, Maya said. He is the admiral of a fleet that just vanished. I thought about Damon sitting in my office. I thought about him calling the bank and finding out the accounts were frozen because of the audit Maya had requested. I thought about him looking out the window and seeing the repo trucks coming for the fleet because the lease had been terminated. He wanted the throne. I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. He got it. Maya agreed. But he forgot to check the upholstery, I said. I buttoned my jacket. Come on, Maya, let's go get a steak. I suddenly have an appetite. We walked out of the courthouse. I didn't look like a defeated man anymore. I looked like a man who had just set a timer on a bomb and was walking away in slow motion. 30 days. I gave my son 30 days to ruin himself. But I knew deep down he wouldn't even need a week. The trap was sprung. The cheese was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. 30 days is a lifetime in the logistics business. In 30 days, you can drive a rig from Alaska to the tip of Florida 5 times. You can move enough steel to build a skyscraper. Or, if you are my son Damon, you can take a machine that has hummed perfectly for 4 decades and strip its gears until it screams. I spent those 30 days in purgatory. I was living in the motel with Maya, checking out every morning and checking back in every night to avoid suspicion. We were ghosts. But even ghosts have eyes. I still had my sources. The court took my keys and my title, but they couldn't take the loyalty of the men and women who had eaten Christmas dinner at my table. Every night my burner phone would light up with text messages and photos from inside the warehouse. The first week was the purge. Damon fired the floor manager because he looked at Tiffany the wrong way. He replaced the coffee in the break room with a vending machine that charged $2 for a cup of brown water. He cut the overtime pay for the weekend shifts, claiming he was optimizing cash flow. Big Mike called me on the 3rd day. He was crying. He was a man who could lift a transmission block with his bare hands, and he was crying. Ray, he told me, they are ruining it. They are routing the trucks wrong. They are sending guys into snowstorms without chains to save time. Drivers are quitting, Ray. Good men. Men with 20 years of safe driving awards. They are walking out. I sat on the edge of my motel bed and gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to drive down there. I wanted to kick down the doors and take the wheel, but Maya sat across from me, shaking her head slowly. Not yet, Ray, she whispered. Let it burn. So I gave Mike an order. The hardest order I ever had to give. Stay put, Mike, I said. Don't quit. And tell the other senior drivers to stay. Why, Ray? Mike asked. Why should we work for that clown? Because I need you to follow the rules, I said. Not the new rules. The federal rules. If the logbook says you rest for 10 hours, you rest for 10 hours. If the speed limit is 55, you do not go 56. If the truck needs a safety inspection, you do not move it until the paperwork is signed. But Ray, Mike said, confused. That will slow everything down. We usually fudge the inspection times by a few minutes to make the delivery window. You know that. I know, I said. But right now, Damon is the boss, and Damon needs to learn that regulations are not suggestions. Do exactly what the contract says, Mike. Malicious compliance. And so the slowdown began. It wasn't a strike. It was worse. It was a suffocating blanket of bureaucracy. Damon didn't understand why deliveries that used to take 2 days were now taking 4. He didn't understand that the efficiency of Bishop Logistics came from the mutual respect between the office and the road. He had destroyed that respect, so the road fought back. By the second week, the client complaints started rolling in. I saw the emails. Maya had hacked into the server. Where is my steel? Why is the produce rotting on the dock? I am canceling my contract. Damon's replies were frantic. He blamed the weather. He blamed the traffic. He blamed the drivers. He never once looked in the mirror. Then came the incident that changed everything. The incident that turned a failing business into a criminal enterprise. It was a Tuesday, a hot, humid Tuesday in late July. We had a contract with a pharmaceutical company to transport insulin. It was a high-value load. $2 million worth of life-saving medicine packed into a refrigerated trailer. The reefer unit on trailer 402 had been acting up for months. I had it scheduled for a full compressor replacement. It was a $5,000 repair. I saw the maintenance request in the system. The head mechanic had flagged it as urgent, but Damon saw the price tag. $5,000. That was the price of a table at the club he wanted to go to. I saw his response in the system. Denied. Just top up the Freon and send it out. We will fix it next quarter. Next quarter. I stared at the screen in my motel room and I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. You don't top up a dying compressor. You replace it. Especially when you are carrying medicine that spoils if it goes above 40 degrees. I picked up the phone to warn someone. Anyone. But Maya closed the laptop. Ray, she said, her voice hard. If you warn them, you violate the court order. You are interfering with operations. Gerald will use that to lock you away forever. But the medicine. Maya, I pleaded. It will spoil. And that is on him, Maya said. He signed the denial. His name is on the work order. I watched the GPS tracker as truck 402 left the yard. I watched it head south toward Atlanta into the heat wave. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the floor praying for a miracle. Praying that the old machine would hold on for just one more run. It didn't. At 3 a.m., the driver called dispatch. The cooling unit had seized. The temperature inside the trailer was climbing. 50 degrees, 60 degrees, 80 degrees. The driver tried to save it. He pulled into a service station and tried to pack the trailer with bags of ice, but it was like trying to stop a forest fire with a garden hose. By the time the truck reached the distribution center, the load was soup. $2 million of insulin ruined. Cooked. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The pharmaceutical company didn't just demand a refund. They demanded penalties. They threatened a lawsuit for negligence. They wanted $3 million in damages, and they wanted it within 48 hours or they would go to the press. Damon panicked. We listened to the audio from the executive office. Joe had planted a bug under the desk before he walked out. Damon was screaming. He sounded like a cornered animal. Fix it, he yelled at Tiffany. Fix it! How can I fix it? Tiffany screamed back. You are the one who canceled the repair, you cheap idiot. We don't have $3 million. The accounts are frozen, remember? We can only access operating cash. I need the insurance money. Damon cried. Insurance won't cover this, Tiffany hissed. I read the policy. It excludes negligence. You denied the repair in writing, Damon. They will laugh at us. Silence filled the room. Then I heard the sound of glass breaking. Damon had thrown something. We are going to jail, he whispered. If we don't pay, they will sue us. The court will see I destroyed the company in 3 weeks. My dad will win. No, Tiffany said. Her voice dropped to that dangerous reptilian whisper. No, he won't. We just need to borrow the money. Just for a few days until the sale to the private equity firm goes through. Once we sell the company, we can pay it back and no one will know. Borrow from who, Damon asked. The banks won't touch us. We have the pension fund, Tiffany said. I stopped breathing. The Employee Benevolent Fund. It was a sacred trust. It was money I had set aside for 30 years. $1 from every hour every driver worked, matched by $1 from me. It was their retirement. It was their safety net. There was over $4 million in that account sitting in low-risk bonds. You can't touch that, Damon said. That is a felony, Tiffany. That is federal prison time. It is only a loan, Tiffany insisted. We are the trustees now, Damon. We have the passwords. We wire the money, pay the pharmaceutical company, keep them quiet. Then next week when we sell the assets, we wire it back. No harm, no foul. But if the sale doesn't go through, Damon stammered. It will go through, Tiffany snapped. Because we will make it go through. Do it, Damon. Do it, or we lose everything. I looked at Maya. She was already typing. They are logging into the secure portal, she said. Her fingers were flying across the keys. Stop them, I said. My voice was choking. That is Joe's money. That is Big Mike's money. I can't stop them, Maya said. But I can track them. She hit enter. There, she said, pointing at the screen. A wire transfer request. $3 million from account ending in 559. Destination account, General Operating. Damon's trembling finger must have hit the enter key in that plush office because on our screen the status changed from pending to processing. They did it, I whispered. They just stole $3 million from their own employees. Maya sat back in her chair. She didn't look triumphant. She looked sad. They just crossed the line from incompetence to criminality, she said. This isn't civil court anymore, Ray. This is the FBI. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was coming up. It was going to be another hot day. I felt a strange calmness wash over me. The anxiety was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was the cold clarity of the executioner. They thought they were borrowing money, I said. But they were digging a grave. I turned to Maya. Print it, I said. Print the transfer receipt. Print the denial of the repair order. Print the chat logs. What are you going to do? Maya asked. I am going to get dressed, I said. I am going to put on my best suit. And I am going to go visit my son. To warn him, Maya asked. No, I said. To watch him fall. Because a father teaches his son to walk. But sometimes a father has to watch his son trip so he learns to look at the ground. Damon just jumped off a cliff thinking he could fly. I grabbed my jacket. Let's go, Maya. The 30 days aren't up yet, but I think we have seen enough. We walked out of the motel room, leaving the smell of stale smoke behind. We stepped into the light armed with 3 sheets of paper that weighed more than all the gold in Fort Knox. The chaos was over. The judgment was about to begin. The rain had stopped, but the asphalt of the warehouse parking lot was still slick and black like oil. It was 2 a.m, the witching hour, the time when honest men were sleeping and thieves were working. Tonight, I was the thief. I sat in the passenger seat of Joe's truck watching the security camera pan left, then right, then left again. I knew the rhythm because I had paid for the system. It had a blind spot of exactly 7 seconds every rotation. We need the physical logs Ray Maya had told me back at the motel. The digital transfer shows the money leaving the account, but Gerald will claim it was a glitch or a hacked terminal. We need the server access logs. We need to prove that Damon's user ID authorized the transfer from a specific IP address inside the building. We need the smoking gun. I looked at Joe. He was wearing a black hoodie pulled low over his gray hair. He didn't look like a security guard anymore. He looked like an insurgent. You ready, boss? Joe asked, his hand resting on the door handle. I checked the time on my cheap burner phone. Go, I said. We moved through the shadows. My knees ached and my breath came in short bursts, but the adrenaline masked the pain. We slipped through the side maintenance door, the one with the faulty latch that Damon had been too cheap to fix. We were inside. The warehouse was dark silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units. It felt like walking through a graveyard of giants. I touched the side of a forklift as we passed. It was cold steel. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend who had died. We made our way to the server room located in the basement beneath the executive offices. Joe knelt down at the keypad. They changed the codes, Joe whispered. Try the master override, I whispered back. The fire code. They can't change that without recalibrating the whole system. Joe punched in 4 digits. 1972, the year I started the company. The light turned green. Lazy, I muttered. They are so lazy. We stepped inside. The server room was freezing, kept at a constant 60 degrees to protect the machines. The blue lights of the server racks blinked in the darkness like 1,000 watching eyes. Joe found the main terminal. He pulled a flash drive out of his pocket, the one Maya had loaded with her extraction software. He plugged it in. The screen lit up. A progress bar appeared. 10%, 20%. It was going to take 5 minutes. 5 minutes of standing in the open exposed. I will watch the door, Joe said, taking up a position by the entrance. I couldn't stand still. My nerves were wire-tight. I walked out into the hallway. Above me was the metal staircase leading to the executive suite, my office. or what used to be my office. I heard a sound. It was faint at first. A laugh, a high-pitched giggle that echoed off the concrete walls. I froze. Who was laughing at 2 in the morning in a failing company? I crept up the stairs. The stairs were grated metal and I knew exactly where to step to avoid the squeaks. I reached the landing. The door to my office was cracked open a few inches. A sliver of warm yellow light spilled out onto the dark floor. I moved closer. I told myself it was Damon. Maybe he was drunk again, laughing at his own misfortune. Maybe I could talk to him. Maybe I could save him before the police came. But as I got closer, the voices became clearer. "God, you are bad," the woman's voice purred. It was Tiffany, and then a man's voice. Deep, smooth, familiar. "Not bad, my dear. Just thorough." It wasn't Damon. It was Gerald. My breath caught in my throat. My blood turned to ice. I stepped into the shadow of the door frame and looked through the crack. My desk was gone. The mahogany desk I had sat behind for 40 years was pushed against the wall. In its place was a white leather sofa, and on that sofa were my lawyer and my daughter-in-law. They were half-dressed. A bottle of expensive champagne, the vintage I had been saving for my granddaughter's wedding, was open on the floor. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost retched. This wasn't just adultery. This was incestuous. Gerald was Damon's godfather. He had held Damon at his baptism. I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't look away. "He is such a child," Tiffany said, taking a sip of champagne. She was wearing Ray's robe. My robe. He was crying today, Gerald. Actually crying. He is terrified of his father. Let him cry. Gerald laughed. He ran a hand through Tiffany's hair. Fear makes him obedient. As long as he is scared, he will sign whatever we put in front of him. He signed the transfer. Tiffany giggled. $3 million. He thinks it is a loan. Gerald chuckled a dark, wet sound. The useful idiot. When the FBI comes knocking, Damon will be the one with his signature on the wire transfer. He will go to prison for embezzlement. And we will be in the Cayman Islands with the proceeds from the asset sale. I stood there in the dark, clutching the door frame to keep from falling. They weren't just stealing the money. They were framing my son. They were setting him up to take the fall for everything. Damon was just a pawn, a scapegoat to be sacrificed so they could run away together. My anger shifted. For the last month, I had hated Damon. I had wanted to destroy him, to teach him a lesson. But in that moment, looking at the two people he trusted most in the world plotting his demise, I didn't feel hate for my son. I felt a fierce, protective rage. He was a fool, yes. He was weak, yes. But he was my fool. He was my blood, and these parasites were feeding on him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of not kicking the door down and killing them both with my bare hands. I hit record. I held the phone up to the crack in the door. "How long do we have?" Tiffany asked. "The sale closes on Friday," Gerald said. "Once the funds clear, we fly. We leave Damon holding the bag. We leave Ray in the nursing home. And we start over." "And you are sure Ray won't figure it out?" Tiffany asked. Gerald laughed again. "That sound will haunt me until I die." "Ray," Gerald said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Ray is a truck driver in a suit. He thinks with his muscles. He doesn't have the brain for this level of game. He is probably sleeping in a gutter somewhere right now." I stopped recording. I had enough. I had the confession. I had the conspiracy. I had the knife they were planning to stick in my son's back. I holstered the phone. I backed away down the stairs, moving as silent as a ghost. I reached the server room just as the computer beeped. "Download complete," Joe whispered. He pulled the drive. He looked at my face. He saw the look in my eyes, a look of pure, unadulterated violence. "Ray," Joe asked, his hand going to his belt. "What happened? Did you see Damon?" "No," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "I didn't see Damon. I saw the devil, and his mistress." We moved to the exit. We slipped out into the night, leaving the laughter and the betrayal behind us. We climbed into the truck. "Drive," I said. Joe peeled out of the lot. He didn't ask questions. He drove fast. We were 3 blocks away before I spoke again. "I have it, Joe." "The logs?" Joe asked. I patted my chest pocket where the phone was. "No," I said. "I have the nuke." I looked out the window at the passing street lights. "They called me a truck driver, Joe," I said quietly. "They said I don't have the brain for their game." "They are wrong, boss," Joe said. "They are right," I said. "I don't have the brain for their game. Because I don't play games. I fight wars. I pulled out the phone and looked at the video file. Gerald thinks he is smart. He thinks he is playing chess. But he just knocked over the king. I looked at Joe. Take me to Maya. Wake her up. Tell her to put on a pot of coffee. Why, Joe asked. Because tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, I am going to make a deal with the enemy. Damon Joe asked, confused. No, I said. I am going to make a deal with my son. I am going to show him exactly who is sleeping in his bed. And then I am going to hand him the gun and let him pull the trigger. We drove into the night. The city was asleep. But the storm was just beginning. I had the embezzlement records in one hand and the video of the affair in the other. I wasn't just a plaintiff anymore. I was Judgment Day. And Gerald Carlson was about to find out that a truck driver knows exactly what happens when you stand in front of a moving 18-wheeler. You get flattened. The phone rang at 3 in the afternoon. It was a ringtone I had assigned to Damon years ago, a generic, upbeat chime that now sounded like a funeral knell. I was sitting in the motel room with Maya. The air conditioner was rattling, fighting a losing battle against the heat wave that was suffocating the city. On the table between us lay the evidence we had gathered the night before. The server logs, the video of the affair, the wire transfer receipts. We had enough ammunition to bury a small country, let alone a failing logistics company. I stared at the phone. It vibrated across the cheap particle board table. Answer it, Ray, Maya said softly. You need to hear this. I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and listened. Dad. Dad, are you there? Damon's voice was high, thin, and cracked with panic. I could hear the background noise of the office. Phones ringing unanswered, people shouting. It sounded like the bridge of the Titanic after the iceberg hit. I am here, Damon, I said. Oh, thank God, Damon sobbed. He was actually crying. Dad, it is a disaster. It is a total disaster. The drivers are walking out. Big Mike just parked his rig in the middle of the main gate and threw his keys into the storm drain. He is blocking all traffic. Nothing can get in or out. I closed my eyes. Good old Mike. I made a mental note to buy him a steak dinner when this was all over. And the pharmaceutical company Dad Damon continued his words, tripping over each other. They served us with a notice of intent to sue. $3 million. They are calling the press. Dad, if this gets out, the stock value of the sale will plummet to zero. The private equity guys will walk away. I stayed silent. I let him spiral. You have to come down here, Dad, he begged. You have to talk to Mike. You have to talk to the drivers. They won't listen to me. They call me names. They laughed at Tiffany. You have to tell them to move the trucks. You have to call the pharmaceutical reps and use your old connections to calm them down. I took a deep breath. Is that all, Damon? I asked. No, there is more, he stammered. The bank called. They flagged the transfer. The $3 million we moved. They froze the operating account. Dad, I can't make payroll on Friday. If I miss payroll, the union will strike. You have to write a personal check, just to cover payroll, just for 1 week. I looked at Maya. She was watching me closely, her pen hovering over her legal pad. So, let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice calm and even. You want me to come down there, use my influence to fix your labor dispute, use my reputation to settle your lawsuit, and use my personal savings to pay your employees? Yes, Damon cried. Yes, exactly. You built this place. You can't let it die. And in exchange, I asked, leaning forward, what happens? Do you resign? Do you hand me back the keys? Do you admit to the court that you are incompetent? There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Well, Dad, Damon said, his voice shifting slightly, becoming defensive. We can't do that. Not legally. The conservatorship is still in place. And the deal with the investors, but it is structured with me as the CEO. If I step down now, it voids the contract. We have to stick to the plan. You just need to come in as a senior advisor, an unpaid consultant, just to put out the fires. Once we sell the company, I will pay you back. I promise. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. He still didn't get it. Even with the flames licking at his feet, he was still trying to hold on to the crown. He wanted me to be the janitor. He wanted me to clean up his mess so he could sell my life's work and run away with the profits. He wanted me to save him, but he didn't want to respect me. "Damon," I said. "Yeah, Dad. Do you remember when you were 10 years old?" "What, Dad? What does that have to do with anything? Just answer me." "Do you remember when you stole that candy bar from the corner store and the owner caught you?" "Dad, please, I don't have time for stories. I made you walk back in there," I continued, my voice hardening. "I made you apologize, and I made you sweep the floors of that store for a week to pay for a 50-cent chocolate bar. You cried then, too. You begged me to just pay for it. You said it was embarrassing." "Dad, stop. I didn't pay for it, Damon. Because if I paid for it, you would have learned that stealing is free if your father has money." I gripped the phone tighter. "You want to be the boss, Damon. You fought me in court to be the boss. You humiliated me to be the boss." "Well, congratulations. Being the boss isn't about sitting in the big chair and drinking scotch. Being the boss is about standing in the rain when the truck breaks down. It is about looking a man in the eye and telling him you can't pay him. It is about taking the hit. Dad, you can't do this to me. I am your son." "I am not doing anything to you," I said. "I am letting you be the man you claimed you were. You wanted the responsibility. Now you have it. Choke on it." I hung up. The silence in the motel room was deafening. I put the phone down on the table. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer physical effort of breaking my own heart. It goes against every instinct of a parent to watch their child drown. You want to jump in. You want to pull them out. I looked at the empty chair in the corner of the room. For a second, I could almost see Beatrice sitting there. My Beatrice. She had been the soft one usually. She was the one who snuck him cookies when he was grounded. But she was also the one who saw the rot setting in before I did. I remembered a night in the kitchen 3 years before she died. Damon had just dropped out of his second MBA program because it was too hard. He had come to us asking for money to start a nightclub. I was writing the check. I always wrote the check. Beatrice had put her hand over mine. Her skin was thin paper-like, but her grip was strong. "Ray," she had said. Her voice was weak from the chemo, but her eyes were clear. "Stop writing. But he needs to find his way." "B," I had argued. "He won't find his way if you keep paving the road for him." "Ray," she had whispered, "you are not helping him. You are crippling him. You are teaching him that consequences are for other people." I had looked at her confused. "But he is our boy. That is why you have to stop," she said. "Don't love him to death, Ray. Don't be so generous that you turn him into a monster. If you never let him fall, he will never learn how to stand up. And one day when we are gone, he will fall hard and he won't know how to survive." I had torn up the check that night. Damon had screamed at us. He hadn't spoken to his mother for a month. And now here we were. Beatrice was right. I had paved the road with gold and it led straight to a cliff. Ray Maya's voice brought me back. I looked up. My face was wet. I hadn't realized I was crying. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "I am not okay. That was the hardest thing I have ever had to do." "But was it the right thing?" Maya asked. I looked at the pile of evidence. I looked at the picture of Tiffany and Gerald laughing on my sofa. "Yes," I said. "It was right. Because he isn't just failing Maya. He is colluding. He is letting them strip the carcass. If I save him now, I don't just lose the company. I lose him. He will never learn. He will spend the rest of his life thinking he can get away with murder." I stood up and walked to the window. The sky was turning a bruised purple. A storm was coming. A real one. "Is the paperwork ready?" I asked. Maya nodded. She picked up a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It contained the death warrant of Damon's administration. "It is all here," she said. "Commercial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit theft, and violation of the lease agreement. And the personal stuff," I asked. She tapped a smaller envelope. "Alienation of affection, adultery. It won't affect the business case, but it will destroy Tiffany in the divorce court." "Send it," I said. Now Maya asked. "It is almost 5 p.m. Send it now," I said. "I want them to get it before they leave the office. I want them to have one long sleepless night to read every single word." Maya called the courier service. I listened to her give the address I knew by heart. I poured myself a glass of lukewarm water. I felt hollowed out. But inside that hollow space, a new structure was forming. A structure made of steel and resolve. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my name. The name Bishop meant something. It meant integrity. It meant grit. Damon, Tiffany, and Gerald had dragged that name through the mud. They had turned it into a punchline. Tomorrow I would scrub it clean. I sat back down and watched the rain start to streak against the glass. They called me senile. They called me weak. They called me a relic. Tomorrow they would call me the plaintiff, and by the time I was done with them, they would wish I was just a memory. The storm outside was picking up thunder rolling in the distance like approaching artillery, but the storm inside the courtroom tomorrow, that was going to be a hurricane. "Get some rest, Maya," I said, staring at the lightning flashing over the city skyline. "We have a funeral to attend in the morning." "Whose funeral?" she asked. "My son's ego," I replied, "and the careers of everyone who helped him feed it." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and expensive cologne, but underneath it all was the unmistakable scent of blood in the water. I had been to court before for traffic violations or contract disputes, but this was different. This wasn't a legal proceeding. It was a public execution, and I was the man standing on the scaffold. When Maya and I walked through the heavy oak doors, the first thing I saw was the flash of cameras. I blinked, blinded by the strobe lights. Tiffany had been busy. She hadn't just invited the local beat reporters. She had tipped off the city news channels and the business tabloids. There were bloggers with smartphones and anchors with microphones, all jostling for a view of the senile tycoon who was losing his mind and his empire. They wanted a show. They wanted to see the old lion roar its shadows so they could put it on the 6 o'clock news. I kept my head up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked down the center aisle with the same cadence I used to march on the parade deck at Paris Island. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked straight ahead at the back of my son's head. Damon was sitting at the plaintiff's table. He was wearing a suit that I knew cost $3,000 because I remembered seeing the charge on the company card before they locked me out. He was hunched over, his shoulders tight. He knew I was there. He could feel my eyes on him like a laser. But he didn't turn around. Tiffany sat next to him. She was dressed in a modest navy blue dress, wearing pearls and minimal makeup. She looked like the picture of a concerned, grieving daughter-in-law. It was a costume, a carefully curated outfit designed to elicit sympathy from the judge and the public. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue every time a camera pointed in her direction. We took our seats. Maya placed her briefcase on the table. It was heavy. It contained the end of their world. But we didn't open it yet. We had to wait. We had to let them fire their guns first. Judge Vance entered. She looked even more exhausted than the last time. She looked at the packed courtroom and frowned. She didn't like the circus. But she couldn't stop it. The motion to make the conservatorship permanent was a matter of public record. "Mr. Carlson," she said, nodding to Gerald, "you may proceed." Gerald stood up. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't use a podium. He wanted to be close to the judge. He wanted to be intimate. He spoke in a low, sorrowful voice that carried to the back of the room. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a happy day for anyone. It is a tragedy. We are not here to attack Mr. Ray Bishop. We are here to protect him. We are here because we love him." I gripped the edge of the table. The audacity of the man. He was sleeping with my daughter-in-law, stealing my money, and plotting to dismantle my legacy, and he had the nerve to talk about love. Gerald turned to look at me. His eyes were full of fake pity. "We have established the financial instability of the company under Ray's recent leadership," Gerald continued. "The missed contracts, the erratic behavior. But today we must address the root cause. We must address the mental state of a man who is clearly no longer living in our reality." He picked up a document. 3 years ago, Ray Bishop lost his wife, Beatrice. It was a devastating blow. We all mourned her. But while most people move through the stages of grief, Ray got stuck. He began to see things. He began to hear things. Gerald walked over to the witness stand and picked up a file. "I have here the records from Dr. Evans, the grief counselor Ray saw for 6 months after the funeral. These notes are painful to read, Your Honor, but they are necessary." Maya stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. These are privileged medical records." "Overruled," the judge said. "The mental capacity of the defendant is the central issue of this case. The court needs to hear this." Gerald smiled. He opened the file. On November 12th, Gerald read, "Ray admitted that he still sets a place at the dinner table for Beatrice. He admitted that he has full conversations with her every night. He asks her for advice on business deals. He asks her which tie to wear. He paused for effect. The courtroom was silent. The reporters were scribbling furiously. On December 5th, Gerald continued. Ray told the counselor that he believes Beatrice is still in the house. He said he can smell her perfume. He said she tells him not to trust his son. Gerald closed the file and looked at the judge. Your Honor, this is not just grief. This is paranoia. This is a man who is taking business advice from a hallucination. He believes his dead wife is warning him against his own flesh and blood. How can we trust him to manage a $50 million company when he is listening to ghosts? I felt the eyes of the room on me. They were looking at me like I was broken, like I was a crazy old man who talked to empty chairs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that yes, I talked to Beatrice. I talked to her because I missed her. I talked to her because she was the only person who ever truly understood me. I talked to her because in a house that felt empty and cold, her memory was the only warmth I had left. That wasn't madness. That was love. That was a marriage that lasted 40 years. But I knew how it sounded. In this cold, sterile room stripped of context, it sounded like insanity. Gerald sat down looking satisfied. He had painted me as a lunatic. Now he needed to paint Damon as the savior. I called Damon Bishop to the stand, Gerald said. Damon stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He walked to the stand and took the oath. His hand was shaking on the Bible. Good. He should shake. He was about to commit perjury in front of God and the world. Damon, Gerald asked softly, "Tell the court why you are doing this. Tell us why you filed this lawsuit." Damon looked out at the audience. He looked at the cameras. He finally looked at me. His eyes were wet. He was a better actor than I gave him credit for. Or maybe he had convinced himself of his own lie. "I love my dad," Damon said, his voice breaking. "He is my hero. He taught me everything I know." He looked down at his hands. "But he is not the same man anymore. After Mom died, he changed. He got angry. He got suspicious. He started hoarding money. He started making bad decisions." "Can you give us an example?" Gerald asked. Damon nodded. "Last week," he said. "The incident with the pharmaceutical shipment. The insulin. Dad forgot to sign the maintenance order for the truck. He let a critical repair slip through the cracks, and because of that the load was ruined. We lost $3 million. I gasped. A collective gasp went through the room. He was blaming me. He was taking his own crime, his own negligence, his own greedy decision to save $5,000, and he was pinning it on me. "It was my fault," Damon continued, wiping a tear. "I should have checked behind him. I should have known he would forget. But I didn't want to micromanage him. I wanted to give him dignity. And because of that, the company is on the brink of bankruptcy." He looked at the judge imploringly. "Your Honor, I don't want his money. I don't want the power. I just want my dad to rest. I want him to go to the lake house. I want him to fish. I want him to sit in the garden and not worry about payroll and insurance and lawsuits. I want to carry the burden for him. That is what a son does." Tiffany let out a loud sob from the audience. She buried her face in a handkerchief. It was a perfect performance. Damon looked at me with those sad, lying eyes. "Please, Dad, just let go. Let me take care of you." The courtroom was moved. I could see it. The reporters were nodding. The bailiff looked sympathetic. Even the judge looked softened. She saw a young man stepping up to the plate trying to save his drowning father. Gerald stood up again. "Thank you, Damon. You may step down." Gerald turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the picture is clear. We have a medical history of hallucinations. We have a documented incident of negligence that cost the company millions. And we have a loving family willing to step in and save the day. There is only one logical choice here. We ask that the conservatorship be made permanent and that Damon Bishop be granted full and irrevocable power of attorney over all assets." The room was silent. The judge took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at me. "Mr. Bishop," she said. "Or rather, Mrs. Maya. Does the defense have anything to say before I rule?" I looked at Maya. She was sitting perfectly still. Her hands were folded on top of the heavy briefcase. She didn't look worried. She looked like a predator waiting for the prey to get just a little bit closer. "We do, Your Honor," Maya said, standing up. "Make it brief, counsel," the judge sighed. "The evidence seems overwhelming. Unless you have a medical expert who can refute the hallucinations, I am inclined to grant the plaintiff's motion. The company is in crisis. It needs leadership. It needs honest leadership." "Your Honor," Maya said. Gerald scoffed. "Objection. Character assassination. Overruled," the judge said. Go on. Maya walked around the table. She didn't go to the podium. She walked over to the witness stand where Damon was still sitting. She looked him up and down. Mr. Damon Bishop, Maya said, you just testified that your father forgot to sign the maintenance order for the truck. Is that correct? Yes, Damon said, looking nervous. He forgets things, and you testified that you only want to save the company, that you have no interest in the money. Of course, Damon said, it is about the legacy, and you testified that you want your father to rest, to go fishing. Yes, Damon said, that is all I want. Maya nodded. She walked back to our table. She placed her hand on the latch of the briefcase. The sound of the latch clicking open was loud in the silent room. It sounded like a gunshot. Your Honor, Maya said, her voice changing, dropping the polite lawyer tone and adopting a sharper, harder edge. We would like to submit new evidence. Evidence of what the judge asked. Competency. No. Your Honor, Maya said, pulling out the thick stack of papers and the flash drive. Evidence of a felony. Gerald stood up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Discovery closed yesterday. This evidence was obtained this morning, Maya said. Or rather, at 2 a.m. this morning. She walked up to the bench and handed the judge the stack of papers. She handed another copy to Gerald. What is this? Gerald asked, looking at the papers with disdain. That, Maya said, pointing to the document in his hand, is the server log from the night the insulin shipment was ruined. It shows that the maintenance request wasn't forgotten by Ray Bishop. It was denied. By you, Damon. Damon's face went white. And that, Maya continued, pointing to the next page, is the wire transfer receipt for $3 million, stolen from the Employee Pension Fund, authorized by Damon Bishop and countersigned by you, Gerald Carlson. The courtroom erupted. The reporters jumped up. The flashes started going off like a strobe light. Order. The judge banged her gavel. Order in this court. Gerald was flipping through the papers, his hands shaking. He looked pale. He looked sick. And finally Maya said, holding up the flash drive, we have a video taken last night inside the executive office, a video that proves that while Mr. Bishop was supposedly hallucinating, his son's lawyer and his son's wife were drinking champagne and plotting to sell the company and flee the country. Damon stood up. He knocked his chair over. That's a lie, he screamed. That's a fake. Is it? The judge asked, her voice icy. She looked at the papers. She looked at the wire transfer. She looked at the denial of service order with Damon's digital signature. I looked at Damon. He wasn't acting anymore. The mask had fallen off. He looked like a terrified child who had just realized the monsters were real. Tiffany had stopped crying. She was staring at Gerald with a look of pure venom. She knew. She knew the game was up. I stood up. I didn't ask for permission. Your Honor, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of 1,000 storms. My son says I talk to ghosts. He is right. I talk to my wife. And do you know what she told me last night? The room went dead silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. She told me that a man who steals from his own workers to pay for his mistakes is not a leader. He is a thief. And she told me that a lawyer who sleeps with his client's wife is not a counsel. He is a predator. I looked at Gerald. He was sweating. A line of perspiration was running down his forehead. You wanted to prove I was crazy, Gerald, I said. Well, here is the proof. I am crazy enough to burn my own house down just to kill the rats inside. The judge looked at the evidence. She looked at Gerald. She looked at Damon. Bailiff, she said quietly, secure the doors. No one leaves this room. The air in the room changed instantly. The smell of blood was gone, replaced by the smell of fear, and for the first time in 30 days I took a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, but the executioner had just dropped the axe, and it hadn't landed on my neck. The silence in the courtroom was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb squad watching a timer count down to 0. The bailiff had locked the double doors. The reporters were leaning forward in their seats, their pens hovering over their notepads like vultures waiting to descend on a carcass. Judge Vance sat on her bench holding the stack of documents Maya had just handed her. She adjusted her glasses. She turned a page, then another. Her face was a mask of judicial neutrality, but I saw the slight tightening of her jaw. She was reading the anatomy of a crime. Gerald stood at the plaintiff's table. He was no longer the confident orator who had preached about love and family 10 minutes ago. He was a man standing on a trapdoor. He kept glancing at the judge, then at the exit, then at Tiffany. Tiffany was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she clutched her handbag. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. Damon was the only one moving. He was rocking slightly in his chair. He looked at me, then at the judge, then at his wife. He looked lost. He knew something terrible was happening, but his brain couldn't process the magnitude of it yet. He was still the boy waiting for his father to fix the broken toy. But I wasn't going to fix this toy. I was the one who had broken it. Maya stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She stood with the stillness of a sniper. "Your Honor," Maya said, her voice cutting through the heavy air, "while the court reviews the physical evidence of the wire fraud, I would like to direct your attention to the video evidence on the screen." Gerald jumped up. "Objection," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is highly irregular. We have not authenticated this footage." "This is an ambush." "It is rebuttal evidence," Mr. Carlson, the judge said without looking up from the papers. "Overruled. Play the video." The large monitor mounted on the wall to the left of the jury box flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, black and white night vision footage. But the audio was crystal clear. It was the sound of a champagne cork popping. The image sharpened. It showed the interior of my executive office, my office, the one Damon claimed he was running. But Damon wasn't in the video. Instead, the court saw Gerald Carlson sitting on the white leather sofa, his tie undone, his jacket thrown carelessly on the floor. And next to him, sitting too close, was Tiffany Bishop. A gasp went through the courtroom. It started in the back row and rolled forward like a wave. On the screen, Tiffany laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "He is such a child," she said, taking a sip from a crystal flute. "He was crying today, Gerald. Actually crying. He is terrified of his father." I looked at Damon. He stopped rocking. He froze. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He was watching his wife, the woman he had married against my advice, the woman he had defended against. Every critic talk about him like he was a nuisance. On the screen, Gerald laughed. He ran a hand down Tiffany's arm. "Let him cry. Fear makes him obedient. As long as he is scared, he will sign whatever we put in front of him." In the courtroom, the real Gerald closed his eyes. He knew there was no coming back from this. This wasn't just evidence, this was social suicide. The video continued. "He signed the transfer," Tiffany giggled. $3 million. He thinks it is a loan. "The useful idiot," Gerald said on screen. "When the FBI comes knocking, Damon will be the one with his signature on the wire transfer. He will go to prison for embezzlement, and we will be in the Cayman Islands with the proceeds from the asset sale." "Stop it!" The scream came from the plaintiff's table. It didn't come from Gerald. It came from Damon. Damon stood up so fast his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the floor. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Tiffany. He looked at her with an expression of such raw agony that I almost looked away. It was the look of a man realizing that his entire life was a joke and he was the punchline. "You," Damon whispered, his voice trembling. "You said you loved me. You said we were partners." Tiffany didn't look at him. She stared at the table, refusing to meet his eyes. Her silence was the final nail in the coffin. "And you." Damon turned to Gerald. "You held me. You held me when I was a baby. You are my godfather. You told me my dad was crazy. You told me we had to save the company." Gerald straightened his tie. He tried to compose himself. He tried to summon the lawyer within. "Damon, sit down," Gerald hissed under his breath. "We will discuss this outside. Don't say another word. Discuss it," Damon screamed. He lunged at Gerald. Two bailiffs moved instantly. They intercepted Damon before he could reach the lawyer. They held him back by his arms. Damon didn't fight them. He just collapsed. His legs gave out and he sagged against the bailiffs, sobbing. It was a wretched sound, a sound of total defeat. I stood there watching my son break. Part of me wanted to rush to him. Part of me wanted to tell the bailiffs to let him go so I could hold him, but I stayed rooted to my spot. He had to feel this. He had to feel the burn of the fire he had helped kindle. If I saved him now, he would never learn to fear the flame. Maya paused the video. The image on the screen froze on Gerald and Tiffany clinking glasses. A toast to their treachery frozen in time. "Your Honor," Maya said quietly, "as you can see, this is not a case of a son trying to save a senile father. This is a conspiracy to defraud the company, to frame Damon Bishop for a felony, and to abandon him while the co-conspirators flee the jurisdiction." She pointed to the stack of papers on the judge's bench. The financial records confirm what the video confesses. T&G Solutions, the consulting firm that has drained $500,000 from the company, is registered to Tiffany Bishop and Gerald Carlson. The $3 million wire transfer from the pension fund was executed yesterday, and we have flight manifests showing tickets booked for this Friday to Grand Cayman in the names of Mr. Carlson and Mrs.
Bishop.
The judge looked up. Her eyes were hard as flint. She looked at Gerald. "Mr. Carlson?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "Do you have an explanation? And I suggest you think very carefully before you speak, because you are dangerously close to being taken into custody right now." Gerald took a deep breath. He smoothed his hair. He looked at the cameras, which were flashing wildly. He looked at the ruins of his reputation. And then he did what lawyers do. He found a loophole. "Your Honor." Gerald said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking. "What we have just seen is unfortunate. It is a personal moral failing. I admit that my relationship with Mrs. Bishop is inappropriate, and I apologize to the court for the impropriety." He paused, gaining confidence. However, Gerald continued, his voice rising. "This is a competency hearing. We are here to determine if Ray Bishop is mentally fit to run a company. The fact that I am having an affair does not change the medical facts regarding Mr. Bishop's dementia. The fact that I have a business relationship with Mrs. Bishop does not change the fact that the company is insolvent." He pointed at me. "Ray Bishop is still the man who talks to ghosts. Ray Bishop is still the man who caused a riot at his own warehouse. My personal life is irrelevant to the legal question of conservatorship. This is a matter for divorce court, not probate court." He looked at Damon, who was still sobbing in the arms of the bailiffs. "And as for Damon," Gerald said coldly, throwing his godson to the wolves, "Damon is an adult. He signed the wire transfers. He authorized the payments. If he was manipulated, that is a defense for a criminal trial. But right now he is still the legal guardian, and I am still his attorney until he fires me." I listened to him speak, and I felt a cold admiration for his evil. He was cornered, he was exposed, and yet he was still fighting. He was trying to separate the sin from the law. He was trying to argue that a thief could still be a rightful accuser. Damon looked up. He looked at Gerald with horror. "You are still my attorney," Damon whispered. "You just said you were going to frame me." "I am protecting your interests, Damon," Gerald said, not looking at him. "We need to focus on the objective. We need to secure the company. We can sort out our personal issues later." "Personal issues?" Damon laughed, a hysterical, broken laugh. "You slept with my wife, you stole my money, and you call that a personal issue?" Damon pulled away from the bailiffs. He stood up, swaying on his feet. He looked at me. "Dad," he said. "Dad, tell them. Tell them you are not crazy." I looked at my son. He was asking me to save him, but he was asking the wrong question. He shouldn't be asking me to prove I was sane. He should be asking for forgiveness. I didn't answer him. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said. "Mr. Carlson makes an interesting point. He says his moral character is irrelevant. He says a thief can judge a king." I walked over to the plaintiff's table. I stood right in front of Tiffany. She flinched as if I was going to hit her. "You sold my wife's records, Tiffany," I said softly, so only she could hear. "You sold her jazz. You thought it was just old vinyl." I turned back to the judge. "They say I am unfit because I talk to my dead wife. They say I am stuck in the past. But the past is where the truth lives, Your Honor." I pointed to the papers. "The truth is that this company was built on honor, and these people have none. Gerald claims that Damon is the legal guardian. But Damon is compromised. He is under duress. He is the victim of a crime that is happening in real time in this very courtroom." I looked at Gerald. "You say this is a matter for divorce court, Gerald. You say my mental state is the only issue. You want to stick to the technicalities." I smiled. It was the smile of a man who held the aces. "Fine, let's talk technicalities. Let's talk about the one thing you forgot to check when you stole my throne." I looked at Maya. She nodded. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the final document. The one we had found in the lease agreement, the eviction notice. "Gerald thinks he is still fighting for control of Bishop Logistics," I said. "He thinks if he can prove I am crazy, he keeps the company." I took the document from Maya and held it up. But there is no company left to keep. Gerald frowned. What are you talking about? I am talking about ownership, Gerald, I said. Real ownership. Not the name on the door, but the stones in the foundation. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Carlson is right about one thing. This hearing is about who controls the assets. But he is wrong about who owns them. I dropped the document on the table in front of Gerald. Read it, Gerald. Read it and tell the court what happens to a lease when the tenant commits a felony. Gerald looked down. He read the header. Ray B. Holdings. He read the clause. Clause 14B. His face, which was already pale, turned a sickly shade of gray. He realized finally that he hadn't been playing chess against a senile old man. He had been playing against a grandmaster who had just baited him into a checkmate. Damon looked at the paper. He didn't understand. Dad, Damon asked, what is it? It is the end, son, I said. It is the end of the game. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of this conservatorship, not because I am sane, but because the entity known as Bishop Logistics is effectively defunct. As of this morning, I have terminated all leases. I have repossessed all assets. There is nothing left for Damon to guard except a pile of debt and a cheating wife. The courtroom held its breath. The judge looked at the lease. She looked at me. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough. Mr. Carlson, the judge said, it seems you have a problem. Gerald tried to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at the piece of paper that had just turned his golden parachute into an anvil. I looked at Damon. He was looking at his wife, who was refusing to look at him. He was looking at his lawyer, who was staring at a piece of paper. And then he looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw the boy I used to know. The boy who had stolen a candy bar and gotten caught. He was finally ready to sweep the floor. But first, he had to watch the store burn down. Gerald Carlson was a cockroach in a $3,000 suit, and I mean that with no disrespect to cockroaches, because at least they are honest about being pests. Even after the video played, even after the courtroom saw him laughing about framing my son, even after the judge looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust, Gerald did not stop. He did not plead guilty. He did not ask for mercy. He did what he had done for 30 years. He spun the narrative. He stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He ignored the cameras that were now zooming in on his face, capturing every twitch of his eye. He ignored Damon, who was sitting like a statue of misery at the table. Gerald turned to the judge and he pivoted. It was a masterclass in shamelessness. Your Honor, Gerald said, his voice regaining some of its slippery confidence. The court has seen the evidence. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, there were moral lapses. But we must return to the matter at hand. The financial solvency of Bishop Logistics. He gestured to the stack of papers Maya had submitted, the proof of their embezzlement. The defense has kindly proven my point for me, Gerald argued. The company is bleeding cash. $3 million is gone. Contracts are canceled. The drivers are striking. Whether this was caused by mismanagement or fraud is a question for a later trial. But right now, in this moment, Bishop Logistics is a sinking ship. He walked toward the bench, leaning in like a conspirator. We have a fiduciary duty to the creditors, Your Honor. If we do not act today, the assets will be worthless by Monday. The private equity offer is still on the table. It is the only lifeline we have. We must approve the sale immediately. We must liquidate the company, divide the assets, and put this money into a trust. It is the only way to save any value for Mr. Bishop or his son. I listened to him speak, and I felt a cold fire burning in my gut. He was trying to burn the house down to hide the bodies. He wanted to sell the company quickly so the cash would disappear into the Cayman Islands before the FBI could freeze it. He was using the chaos he created as a justification to finish the robbery. And the worst part was, the judge was listening. She didn't like him, but she was a creature of law. She looked at the numbers. She saw a bankrupt entity. Liquidation was the logical legal step. Mr. Carlson makes a valid point about the solvency, Judge Vance said slowly. If the company cannot operate, it must be sold to satisfy debts. Damon looked up. His eyes were red. You are going to sell it, he whispered. After everything, you are still going to sell it. It is for your own good, Damon Gerald snapped. It is the only way you walk away with anything. I had heard enough. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't look at Maya. I simply stood up. I pushed my chair back. It made a scraping sound against the floor that cut through Gerald's monologue like a knife. I buttoned my jacket. I straightened my tie. I stood with my feet shoulder-width apart, my back ramrod straight, my chin up. It was the stance of a staff sergeant inspecting the troops. It was the stance of a man who had walked through jungles where everything tried to kill him and had come out the other side. "Mr. Bishop," the judge said, looking at me, "please sit down. Your attorney can speak for you." "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it resonated off the wood paneling. It came from deep in my chest. Maya is a fine lawyer, but she didn't build this. I did. And I will speak for myself. Gerald rolled his eyes. "Here we go," he muttered. "Another war story from the senile old man." I walked to the center of the room. I ignored the podium. I stood in the open space between the tables. I looked at Damon. I looked at Tiffany, who was staring at her shoes. And finally I looked at Gerald. "You talk about my company like it is a math problem, Gerald," I said. "You talk about assets and liabilities. You talk about liquidation like you are taking out the trash." I took a step closer to him. He flinched. "You have known me for 30 years, I said, "but you never really knew me, did you? You looked at the trucks and you saw dollar signs. You looked at the warehouse and you saw real estate. You looked at me and you saw a checkbook." I turned to the gallery, to the reporters, to the people of the city where I had spent my life. "Bishop Logistics started with one truck," I said, "a 1970 Ford that smelled of rust and tobacco. I drove it 18 hours a day. My wife Beatrice handled the dispatch from our kitchen table. When the engine blew in 75, I didn't have money for a mechanic. I fixed it myself in the snow with numb fingers because I had promised a client his delivery would be there by morning." I looked back at Damon. "That is what you wanted to inherit, son. You wanted the shiny trucks. You wanted the corner office. You wanted the title. But you didn't want the snow. You didn't want the grease." Damon lowered his head. He was weeping silently. And now I said, turning my gaze back to Gerald, "You stand here and tell the court that the only way to save the value is to sell it to strangers. You want to chop it up. You want to strip it for parts." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "You fight over Bishop Logistics like it is a delicious piece of cake," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "You hold your forks and your knives ready to carve your slice. You argue about who gets the biggest piece. You argue about the frosting." I smiled. It was a terrifying smile. The smile of a man who knows the bridge is rigged to blow. "But you forgot one thing," I said. "You forgot to read the recipe." Gerald frowned. "What are you babbling about, Ray? This is exactly what I mean. Your Honor, he is speaking in metaphors about cake. He is incompetent." I ignored him. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. Maya stood up. She reached into her briefcase. She didn't pull out a crisp white legal document. She didn't pull out a digital tablet. She pulled out a file that looked like it had survived a flood. The manila folder was yellowed with age, tattered at the edges. It had a coffee ring stain on the cover. It smelled of old paper and history. I took the file from her. I held it in my hands like a holy text. "This," I said, holding it up for the court to see, "is the recipe." I walked over to the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, "in 1990 I reorganized my business. I did it because I was being sued by a competitor who wanted to put me out of business. I hired a lawyer. Not Gerald. Gerald was just a junior associate back then. I hired a man named Old Man Sterling. He was the meanest, smartest lawyer in Chicago, and he gave me a piece of advice I never forgot." I placed the file on the judge's bench. "He told me that a company is just a piece of paper," I said. "But the things that make money, the trucks, the buildings, the land, those are real. And you never let the piece of paper own the real things." Judge Vance opened the file. Her eyes widened as she looked at the date. October 4th, 1990. Gerald stepped forward, craning his neck to see. "What is that?" he demanded. "We have all the corporate records. We did due diligence." "You did due diligence on Bishop Logistics Incorporated," I said, cutting him off. "You checked the accounts of the operating company. You checked the titles of the vehicles registered to the operating company." I turned to face him fully. "But you never checked who owned the leases, Gerald." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been embalmed standing up. "You assumed," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You assumed that because I was the owner of the company owned the trucks. You assumed that because I was the owner of the land, the company owned the warehouse." I pointed to the yellow document under the judge's hand. But Bishop Logistics Incorporated owns nothing, I said. It owns the furniture, it owns the computers, it owns the coffee machine, but every single truck, every single trailer, and every square inch of concrete in that warehouse belongs to a separate entity. I looked at Damon. It belongs to Ray B. Holdings, I said. And Ray B. Holdings has one shareholder, I said, tapping my chest. Me. And Ray B. Holdings has one ironclad rule written into every single lease agreement signed 30 years ago and renewed automatically every year. I nodded to the judge. Read Clause 14B, Your Honor. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Clause 14B, she read aloud. In the event of a change in management, executive control, or ownership of the lessee, without the express written consent of the lessor, all leases are immediately terminated. All equipment must be returned to the lessor within 24 hours. Failure to do so will result in criminal charges for theft of property. She looked up. She looked at Gerald. Gerald looked like he was going to vomit. I walked back to the center of the room. You want to sell the company, Gerald? I asked. Go ahead. Sell Bishop Logistics. You are selling a list of canceled contracts and a mountain of debt. You are selling a ghost. I looked at Tiffany. You wanted the keys to the house, Tiffany. You changed the locks, but you forgot that the house sits on land owned by the trust. And the trust says that the moment I am removed from the residence, the land lease expires. I spread my hands. You are all trespassing, I said. You are sitting in an office you don't rent, driving trucks you don't own, and living in a house that is legally sitting on my dirt. I turned back to the judge. They wanted to steal my empire, Your Honor, but they didn't realize that the empire wasn't the company. The empire was me. I took a deep breath. I am evoking the nuclear option, I said. As of this morning, I have formally terminated every single lease. I have notified the insurance carriers that Bishop Logistics no longer has an insurable interest in my fleet. I have notified the state police that 500 trucks are currently being operated without the owner's consent. I looked at Damon. You are not the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm, son, I said softly. You are the manager of an empty parking lot. Gerald slumped against the table. He knew it was over. He knew that the private equity firm would pull out the moment they heard this. He knew that the money he planned to steal had just evaporated. But I wasn't done. I looked at the yellow file one last time. Old man Sterling told me to keep this in a safe place, I said. He said keep it for a rainy day. I looked at the storm clouds gathering outside the tall windows of the courtroom. Well, I said, it is pouring. The judge closed the file. She looked at Gerald with a mixture of pity and contempt. It seems, Mr. Carlson, she said dryly, that you are trying to sell a car that you have already crashed. She picked up her gavel. But before I rule on this motion, she said, I believe there is one more matter to address. The matter of the wire transfer. She looked at the bailiff. I think it is time to open the doors, she said. There are some officers waiting in the hallway who would like to have a word with the defense counsel. I stood there tall and unmoving as the reality of my victory washed over the room. I hadn't just beaten them, I had erased them. I had pulled the earth out from under their feet and watched them fall into the abyss they had dug for me. Damon was looking at me. His face was a mask of shock. He finally understood. He finally understood that you don't go to war with a man who draws the maps. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded once. Class is dismissed, son, I thought. And then the doors opened. The air in the courtroom had turned from heavy to suffocating. It felt as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room, leaving only the stale scent of fear. I watched Gerald Carlson. For 30 years I had watched this man operate. I had seen him bluff his way through union negotiations. I had seen him charm auditors. I had seen him lie with a smile so bright it could blind you. But I had never seen him look like this. He was holding the yellowed file I had presented, the file from 1990. His eyes were darting back and forth across the page, scanning the legal text like a man trying to read a map while his car is driving off a cliff. He read Clause 14B. I saw the exact moment the words hit his brain. His face, which had been flushed with the arrogant heat of victory, suddenly went slack. The blood drained out of his cheeks so fast it looked like a magic trick. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was just a silent gape like a fish pulled onto a dock. His hand started to shake. It wasn't a subtle tremor, it was a violent spasm. The paper rattled in the quiet room, a dry, crinkling sound that echoed off the high ceiling. Then he dropped it, The file slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor, landing open at his feet. Gerald Damon whispered. His voice was small, terrified. "What does it say, Gerald? Talk to me." Gerald didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the floor, staring at the trap he had walked right into. He grabbed the edge of the plaintiff's table to steady himself. I took a step forward. I didn't need to shout anymore. I didn't need to rage. I was calm. I was the eye of the hurricane. "You didn't read the fine print, Gerald," I said, my voice low and smooth. "You were so busy looking at the bank accounts you forgot to look at the deeds." I walked past their table. I walked until I was standing right in front of the judge's bench, but I turned my body so I was facing my son and his conspirators. I looked at Damon. He was looking at me with wide, wet eyes, begging for an explanation. I looked at Tiffany. She had stopped checking her phone. She sensed the shift in power. She smelled the danger. And I looked at Gerald, who was still staring at the floor, looking like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack full of rocks. "You sued me," I said, addressing them all. "You dragged my name through the mud. You called me crazy. You called me incompetent. You told the world that I was a senile old man who needed to be put out to pasture." I paused, letting the words hang there. "And you won." Damon blinked. "We won?" "Yes, son," I said, nodding slowly. "The judge agreed with you. You have the court order. You are the legal guardian of Bishop Logistics. You are the CEO. You have the title. You have the corner office. You have the company credit card." I pointed to the corporate seal sitting on the table. "You have the stamp. You have the name. Congratulations." Damon looked confused. He looked at Gerald, waiting for his lawyer to celebrate. But Gerald looked like he was about to vomit. But I said, and the word cut through the air like a razor blade. "There is a difference between owning a company and owning the things the company uses." I walked over and picked up the file from the floor. I dusted it off gently. In 1990, I learned a hard lesson about liability. I learned that if a truck hits a bridge and the company gets sued, you can lose everything. So I made a choice to separate the church from the state. I opened the file and held it up. Bishop Logistics is an operating company, I explained. It manages people, it manages contracts, it manages payroll, but it doesn't own anything. Not a single bolt, not a single tire, not even the chair you are sitting in right now, Damon. Damon stood up slowly. "What do you mean?" I said, locking eyes with him. "That every single truck in that fleet belongs to Ray B. Holdings. Every trailer belongs to Ray B. Holdings. The warehouse on Industrial Boulevard belongs to Ray B. Holdings. And even the headquarters building belongs to Ray B. Holdings." I took a breath. "And Bishop Logistics just rents them." I turned to Gerald. "And you know how leases work, Gerald. You wrote enough of them back in the day. A lease is a privilege, not a right. And privileges can be revoked." I walked closer to them. You wanted the company. You got it. But you forgot that the company is just a shell. It is a ghost. It is nothing without the tools to do the job. I raised 3 fingers. "I have 3 words for you," I said. The courtroom was so silent you could hear a pin drop. The reporters were leaning forward. The judge was watching me over her spectacles. Damon was holding his breath. "Leases are canceled." I said it with the finality of a judge passing a death sentence. "Leases are canceled." Gerald made a choking sound. "You can't do that," he rasped, his voice weak. "We have a contract. We have a 30-year agreement." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "Read the clause, Gerald," I said, pointing to the paper. Read the change of control provision. Clause 14B. I didn't wait for him to read it. I recited it from memory. I had memorized it the day I signed it 30 years ago, knowing that one day I might need a weapon of last resort. "The lessor reserves the right to terminate this agreement immediately and without penalty if the executive management of the lessee changes without the written consent of the lessor." I looked at Damon. "You are the new executive management, son. You fought for it. You cried for it. And the moment the judge banged that gavel, the moment she gave you control, you triggered the clause." I turned to the gallery. "As of 10 a.m. this morning, Ray B. Holdings has exercised its right to terminate all agreements with Bishop Logistics." I looked back at Tiffany. "That means the trucks aren't yours anymore. The warehouse isn't yours. The office isn't yours. You are trespassing." Tiffany stood up, her face twisting in fury. "You can't do this," she screamed. "We have a buyer. We have a private equity firm ready to pay $50 million. I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "You have a buyer for Bishop Logistics," I corrected her. But Bishop Logistics is now a company with $5 million in debt, $3 million in stolen pension funds, and zero assets. It has no trucks. It has no building. It has no value. I leaned in close to her. You are trying to sell an empty box, Tiffany. And I just took the gift out. Damon collapsed back into his chair. He looked at his hands. So I own nothing, he whispered. No son, I said. You own plenty. You own the lawsuits from the pharmaceutical company. You own the debt to the bank. You own the payroll obligations you can't meet. And you own the criminal investigation for the wire transfer you signed. I looked at Gerald. And you, Gerald. You thought you were so smart. You thought you could push the old man out and strip the copper wire from the walls, but you didn't check the foundation. You didn't do your homework. Gerald looked up at me. His eyes were dead. He knew. He knew his career was over. He knew his license was gone. He knew prison was waiting. This is bad faith, Ray, he mumbled. You trapped us. I trapped you, I asked, raising my voice. I didn't trap you. I fed you. I gave you a career. I gave you a life, and you tried to eat me. I didn't set a trap, Gerald. I just stopped holding up the ceiling you were trying to bring down on my head. The judge cleared her throat. Mr. Bishop, she said, addressing me, are you telling this court that the entity Bishop Logistics is effectively insolvent due to the cancellation of these leases? Yes, Your Honor, I said. Without the fleet, they cannot generate revenue. Without the revenue, they cannot pay their debts. The company is dead. My son is the captain of a sunken ship. The judge looked at the paperwork. She looked at the clause. She looked at the panicked faces of the plaintiffs. It appears, she said, that the conservatorship is a moot point. There is nothing left to conserve. She looked at Damon. Mr. Bishop, she said gently, I suggest you get a criminal defense attorney. A different one from Mr. Carlson. Because your problems are just beginning. Damon put his head in his hands and started to sob. Not the fake tears from before. These were the tears of a man who realizes he has thrown away a diamond to pick up a piece of broken glass. I looked at him. My heart ached. It truly did. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. But I couldn't. Beatrice's voice was in my head. Don't love him to death, Ray. He had to learn. He had to burn. I turned my back on them. I looked at Maya. She was closing her briefcase. She looked tired, but proud. We are done here, I said. We walked toward the doors. Behind me, I could hear Tiffany screaming at Gerald. I could hear Damon crying. I could hear the reporters shouting questions. Mr. Bishop, how does it feel to destroy your own company? I stopped at the door. I turned around one last time. I didn't destroy it, I said to the room. I just took it back. I walked out into the hallway. The air was cooler out here. I took a deep breath. I felt lighter. The weight of the last month, the weight of the betrayal, the weight of the fear, it was all gone. I had lost my company. I had lost my son, but I had kept my soul. And as I walked toward the exit, I knew that somewhere Beatrice was smiling. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. Big Mike answered on the first ring. Ray, is it over? It is over, Mike, I said. What do we do now, boss? The guys are worried. The trucks are just sitting there. Tell them to sit tight, I said. Tell them to get some rest. Why? Mike asked. Because I said, pushing open the courthouse doors and stepping into the rain. Tomorrow I am starting a new company, Ray B. Transport, and I am going to need drivers. I could hear Mike smiling through the phone. We will be there, Ray. We will all be there. I hung up. I walked down the steps. The rain felt good on my face. It felt like a baptism. I was 72 years old. I was broke. I was starting over. And I had never felt more alive. Gerald Carlson was frantically flipping through the pages of the lease agreement. The sound of crinkling paper was the only noise in the courtroom. He was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a missing comma, a vague definition, a typo, anything that would invalidate the clause I had just read. He was sweating. A dark stain was spreading under the arms of his expensive Italian suit. He looked like a man trying to bail water out of the Titanic with a teaspoon. There has to be a grace period, Gerald stammered, his finger trembling as it traced the lines of text. There is always a cure period. You have to give us 30 days to rectify the breach. You can't just seize the assets instantly. It is unconscionable. It is bad faith. I stood there calm and immovable. It is not bad faith, Gerald, I said. It is a contract. You are a lawyer. You know what the word immediate means. It doesn't mean 30 days. It doesn't mean tomorrow. It means now. Gerald looked up at the judge. Your Honor. He pleaded desperation, cracking his voice. If you allow this, you are effectively bankrupting the company. You are destroying the livelihood of hundreds of people. The judge looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was cold. Mr. Carlson, she said, you petitioned this court to give Damon Bishop full control of the company. You argued that he was the rightful leader. You got what you wanted. But leadership comes with liabilities. If the lease says the equipment can be repossessed upon a change of control and you changed the control, then you triggered the repossession. You walked into this room asking for the keys to the kingdom. You cannot complain now that the castle is empty. Damon stood up. He looked pale like a ghost haunting his own life. But what about the debt, Damon whispered. What about the $5 million we owe the bank? What about the $3 million for the insulin? If we don't have the trucks, how do we pay it back? I turned to my son. This was the hardest lesson of all, the lesson that would scar him forever, but maybe, just maybe, it would save his soul. The debt belongs to Bishop Logistics, I explained gently. The corporation borrowed the money. The corporation lost the insulin. And you, Damon, are the corporation. I pointed to myself. Ray B. Holdings, on the other hand, has zero debt. I own the trucks free and clear. I own the land free and clear. When I take my trucks back, I leave the debt with you. Damon swayed on his feet. He grabbed the back of his chair to stop from falling. So he said, his voice barely audible, I have $5 million in debt. I have a lawsuit pending. And I have no way to make money. Exactly, I said. You are bankrupt, son. You are finished. The reality hit the room like a physical blow. The reporters were typing furiously, capturing the fall of a dynasty in real time. But the loudest reaction didn't come from Damon. It came from the woman sitting next to him. Tiffany stood up. Her face, usually a mask of composed elegance, was twisted into a snarl of pure, ugly rage. She looked at Damon not with pity, not with love, but with the look of a person realizing they had bet their life savings on a horse with a broken leg. You idiot, Tiffany screamed. The sound tore through the courtroom. You useless, incompetent idiot, she shrieked, turning on Damon. You told me you had this handled. You told me your father was stupid. You told me we were going to be rich. Tiffany, please, Damon stammered, reaching out a hand to her. We can figure this out. We can appeal. Don't touch me, she yelled, slapping his hand away. Figure it out. There is nothing to figure out, Damon. You are broke. You are worse than broke. You are in debt, and you are going to prison. She grabbed her handbag, clutching it like a weapon. I wasted 5 years on you, she spat. 5 years pretending to listen to your boring stories. 5 years pretending you were a man, and for what? To end up with nothing. To end up the wife of a convict. Damon looked at her, his eyes wide with shock. The veil was finally lifted. He wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at a stranger who had been sleeping in his bed, counting the days until he cashed out. You only wanted the money, Damon asked, his voice breaking. Of course I wanted the money. Tiffany laughed a harsh, jagged sound. Did you think I wanted you? Look at you, Damon. You are weak. You are a child. You couldn't even run a lemonade stand without your daddy holding your hand. And now look at you. Daddy took the lemonade stand away, and you are just crying in the dirt. She turned to Gerald. And you, she screamed at the lawyer. You said you were a shark. You said you knew every loophole. You are not a shark, Gerald. You are a worm. You let an old man with a cane outsmart you. Gerald was slumped in his chair, staring at the table. He didn't even look up. He was already calculating his own prison sentence. I am leaving, Tiffany announced. I am filing for divorce in the morning, and don't you dare try to contact me, Damon. If you come near me, I will get a restraining order. She turned to walk out. Damon snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was the explosion of a pressure cooker that had been building for years. The humiliation, the betrayal, the loss of his father, the loss of his company, and now the cruel mockery of the woman he loved. It was too much for one man to hold. No, Damon roared. He didn't lunge at Tiffany. He lunged at the architect of his destruction. He threw himself across the table at Gerald. You did this, Damon screamed. He grabbed Gerald by the lapels of his suit and hauled him out of the chair. They crashed onto the floor in a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. "You lied to me," Damon yelled, punching Gerald in the face. "You told me to sue him. You told me he was crazy. You stole my life." Gerald tried to cover his face, but Damon was possessed. He was punching blindly, tears streaming down his face, screaming incoherently. "You slept with her. You stole my money. You ruined everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The reporters jumped up, some standing on benches to get a better view. The judge was banging her gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. "Order bailiff, arrest them. Order 2. Bailiffs rushed forward. They grabbed Damon, trying to pull him off Gerald, but Damon held on. He had his hands around Gerald's throat now. "I trusted you," Damon sobbed, squeezing tight. "You were my godfather." "Get off him!" the bailiff shouted, struggling to break Damon's grip. "It took 3 officers to pull my son off the lawyer." They dragged him back, pinning him against the jury box. Damon's lip was bleeding. His suit was torn. He was chest-heaving, his eyes wild and unfocused. Gerald lay on the floor, gasping for air, blood trickling from his nose. He looked up at the ceiling, dazed. Tiffany stood near the door, watching with a look of disgust. She didn't look scared. She just looked annoyed that her exit had been delayed by the drama. I stood in the center of the storm. I hadn't moved. I hadn't flinched. I watched my son being handcuffed. I watched the man who called himself my friend bleeding on the floor. I watched the woman who broke my family checking her watch. The judge stood up, her face white with anger. "Take them into custody," she ordered. "Mr. Damon Bishop and Mr. Gerald Carlson are to be detained immediately for assault and battery. And based on the evidence presented today, I am recommending the district attorney open an immediate investigation into wire fraud and embezzlement." She looked at Tiffany. "And you, Mrs. Bishop, do not leave town. The court considers you a material witness and a person of interest." Tiffany's face paled. For the first time, she looked afraid. I looked at Damon as the officers started to lead him away. He looked at me. His anger was gone, replaced by a deep, crushing shame. "Dad," he whispered. I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to wait for me at the door when I came home from a long haul. I saw the teenager I tried to teach to change a tire. I saw the man who had lost his way. I didn't turn away. But I didn't step forward either. "I am sorry, Damon," I said softly. He lowered his head. I watched them take him through the side door, the door that led to the holding cells. The courtroom began to clear. The reporters were rushing out to file their stories. The show was over. The empire had fallen. Maya walked up to me. She placed a hand on my arm. "Ray," she asked, "are you okay?" I looked around the empty room. It felt cold. "I am fine, Maya," I said. "What do we do now?" she asked. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my empty briefcase. "We leave," I said. I turned and walked down the aisle. I passed Tiffany, who was arguing with a police officer near the exit. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. "Ray, please," she started. "I didn't mean it." Gerald forced me. I didn't even slow down. I walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. She didn't exist to me anymore. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the hallway. The marble corridor stretched out before me, long and echoing. I was alone. I had no company. I had no son. I had no house to go back to tonight. But I had the truth. I walked toward the elevator. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Clip, clop, a steady rhythm. I didn't look back at the courtroom. I didn't look back at the wreckage. You don't look back at a burning building after you have made it out alive. You just keep walking. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise, shutting out the pain, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. I looked old. I looked tired. But I was standing up straight. The collapse was over. The dust was settling. And now I had work to do. The courtroom doors closed behind me, but the echo of the gavel didn't stop. It reverberated through the city, shaking the foundations of the false lives my son and his conspirators had built. They say that justice is blind, but I disagree. Justice sees everything. It just waits until you have climbed high enough for the fall to break your neck. And the fall of Damon Bishop, Tiffany Bishop, and Gerald Carlson was not a stumble. It was a skydive without a chute. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs click shut. I didn't need to see it to know it was happening. I went to a small diner 2 blocks away, the one where the waitresses knew my name and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. I sat in a booth by the window watching the rain wash the grime off the streets. But inside the courthouse, the storm was raging. My phone started buzzing with updates from Maya. She was still inside coordinating with the district attorney. The text messages came in like a ticker tape of destruction. Damon and Tiffany arrested, charges filed, wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, Gerald detained, obstruction of justice, money laundering, bar association notified, license suspended pending investigation. I read the words and I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness, just the numbness of a surgeon who has just cut out a gangrenous limb. It had to be done. The patient would live, but he would never be the same. The next few days were a blur of headlines and flashing lights. The media which Tiffany had summoned to witness my humiliation now feasted on her downfall. They camped out on the lawn of the mansion that was now legally back in my possession. They filmed the repo trucks towing away Damon's Range Rover and Tiffany's Mercedes. They filmed the bank officials pasting foreclosure notices on the windows of the downtown condo Gerald owned. I watched it all on the small television in my motel room. I saw Tiffany being led out of the police station in handcuffs covering her face with a jacket. The expensive white coat she had worn to threaten me was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that didn't care about her social standing. She looked small. She looked common. The arrogance that had fueled her cruelty had evaporated, leaving behind a frightened woman who finally realized that charm doesn't work on a federal judge. Gerald fared no better. The legal community turned on him like a pack of wolves. When a lawyer steals, it makes every other lawyer look bad, so they destroy the traitor with extreme prejudice. His firm dissolved overnight. His partners sued him. His assets were frozen. The man who had spent 30 years building a reputation as a shark was now just chum in the water. I heard he tried to cut a deal offering to testify against Damon to save his own skin. But the DA wasn't interested. They had the video. They had the bank records. They didn't need a snitch when they had a confession in 4K resolution. And Damon, my son. He was being held at the county detention center without bail. The judge had deemed him a flight risk thanks to the flight manifests Maya had produced. He was sitting in a 6x8 cell, wearing shoes without laces, eating food that wasn't fit for a dog. He was surrounded by men who had grown up hard men who didn't care about his MBA or his bespoke suits. For the first time in his life, Damon Bishop was exactly like everyone else. He was just a number. I stayed away. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I spent my days with Joe and Maya working out of a temporary office setting up Ray B Transport. We were busy rehiring the drivers, locating the trucks, inspecting the fleet. I threw myself into the work because if I stopped, if I let myself think for even a second, I would crumble. But the past has a way of reaching out. It was Friday night, 3 days after the trial. I was alone in the new office reviewing fuel contracts. The phone on my desk rang. It wasn't the business line, it was my personal cell. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I knew who it was. My gut told me. I let it ring 3 times. 4 times. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Part of me wanted to smash the phone against the wall. But the father in me, the part that had held him when he scraped his knee, the part that had taught him to fish, that part needed to hear his voice. I picked it up. This is a collect call from an inmate at the county detention center. To accept charges, press 1. I pressed 1. The mechanical click sounded like a prison door slamming. Dad. The voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the arrogant CEO who had screamed at me in the warehouse. It wasn't the smooth talker who had lied on the witness stand. It was a broken, jagged whisper. I am here, Damon, I said, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Dad, you have to help me. Please. You have to get me out of here. He started to cry. It was a wet, ugly sound. They put me in general population, Dad. It is terrifying. There are guys here. They look at me like I am meat. I can't sleep. I can't eat. You have to post bail. I stayed silent. I listened to the background noise of the jail, the shouting, the clanging of metal. The bail is set at $500,000, Damon said, rushing his words. I know you have it. I know you have the assets. Just put up the warehouse. Just sign a bond. Please, Dad, I will pay you back, I swear. Once this blows over, I closed my eyes. He still didn't get it. Once this blows over, I asked, my voice quiet but cutting. Damon, you are charged with federal crimes. This doesn't blow over. This isn't a bad grade in algebra. This isn't a speeding ticket. This is prison. I didn't do it, Damon screamed. It was Gerald. It was Tiffany. They tricked me. I was just a pawn. Dad, You saw the video. They were laughing at me. I opened my eyes and looked at the photo of Beatrice on my desk. I saw the video. Damon, I said. I saw them laughing. But I also saw your signature on the wire transfer. I saw your signature on the denial of the repair order for the insulin truck. I saw you stand in court and lie about my mental health. I didn't mean it. I was scared. You were greedy, I corrected him. You were weak, and you let your weakness hurt people. You hurt Big Mike. You hurt the drivers. You hurt me. And you spit on your mother's memory. Dad, please. Damon sobbed, his voice rising to a shriek. I am your son. You can't leave me in here. I am your flesh and blood. Mom wouldn't want this. Mom would save me. The mention of his mother snapped something inside me. It was the final straw. He was using her name, the name of the woman whose records his wife had sold for a handbag, to manipulate me. He wanted a savior. He wanted the soft, warm embrace of a parent who would make the bad things go away. But I wasn't a savior anymore. I was a witness. Listen to me, Damon, I said, my voice dropping to a register of cold steel. I leaned forward, gripping the phone. You want bail money? You want someone to come down there and sign the papers and take you home and make you hot cocoa? Yes, yes, Dad, please. Well, I said, taking a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. Call your mother. There was a silence on the line, a confused, stunned silence. What? Damon whispered. Call your mother, I repeated. She was the one who always softened the blow. She was the one who hid your mistakes. She was the one who couldn't bear to see you suffer. Dad, Damon stammered. Mom is... She is dead. Oh, I said, feigning surprise. Oh, wait. That is right. She is dead. I looked at the empty chair across from me. She is dead, I continued, my voice devoid of all emotion. And you let your wife sell her favorite music for a purse. You let your lawyer call her a ghost. So I guess she can't help you. Dad, don't. And I can't help you either, I said, because the father who raised you died in that courtroom when you called him crazy. The man talking to you right now, he is just the owner of Ray B Transport, and he doesn't bail out embezzlers, Dad. No, don't hang up. You are on your own, son, I said. Dad, I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear his tiny, tinny voice screaming my name. Goodbye, Damon. I pressed the red button. The line went dead. The screaming stopped. I sat there in the silence of the office. The hum of the refrigerator in the break room seemed deafening. My hand was trembling, just a little. I looked at my hand. It was the hand that had held him when he was a baby. It was the hand that had taught him to throw a baseball. And it was the hand that had just locked the door on him. I felt a tear run down my cheek. Just one. It was hot and salty. I wiped it away with a rough swipe. It was cruel. I knew it was cruel. But it was the only kindness left. If I bailed him out, he would never learn. If I saved him now, he would spend the rest of his life thinking there was always a safety net. He would never find his own feet because he would always be standing on mine. He needed the cage. He needed the fear. He needed to hit the absolute bottom of the rockiest pit in hell so that if he ever climbed out, he would know exactly what it took to survive. I wasn't punishing him. I was forging him, and forging requires fire. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the fleet of trucks parked in the yard. They were lined up perfectly ready for the morning run. They were strong. They were reliable. They did the job they were built to do. I wished my son was a truck. It would have been so much simpler. But he was a man, and men have to make their own choices. I turned off the lights in the office. I walked out into the night, leaving the phone on the desk. I didn't block the number, but I knew I wouldn't answer it again. The lesson was delivered. The tuition was paid. Now it was up to the student to learn. 1 year later, the air in the office of Ray B Holdings tasted different. It didn't smell like fear or desperation anymore. It smelled of fresh coffee and the steady rhythmic hum of productivity. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the yard. The fleet was fully deployed. 500 trucks, all painted a deep metallic blue, were crisscrossing the country, carrying everything from medical supplies to steel beams. But the name on the side of the trucks was no longer Bishop Logistics. It was Ray B Transport, a new name for a clean slate. I took a sip from my mug. It was an old chipped mug that said, "World's Okayest Golfer," a joke Beatrice had given me 20 years ago. I had retrieved it from the box of personal effects the police had returned to me after they cleared out Damon's office. It was the only thing I kept from that era. Everything else, the fancy leather chairs, the modern art, the espresso machine, I had donated to charity. I didn't want the artifacts of my son's vanity cluttering up my peace. There was a knock on the door. It was a confident knock. 2 sharp raps. "Come in," I said, turning away from the window. Maya walked in. She looked different, too. The hunger of the public defender was gone, replaced by the polished assurance of a corporate executive. But she hadn't lost her edge. She was wearing a tailored suit and carrying a tablet, but her eyes were still the eyes of the woman who had helped me plan a war in a motel room. "The quarterly reports are in, Ray," she said, placing the tablet on my desk. "Revenue is up 40%. Driver retention is at an all-time high, and we just secured the government contract for the interstate infrastructure project." I nodded, looking at the numbers. They were good numbers, honest numbers. "And the debt?" I asked. "Paid off," she said. "Every cent. The bank is actually asking if we want to open a new line of credit." "Tell them no," I said. "We build with cash from now on. We don't owe anyone anything." Maya smiled. "I will tell them." She turned to leave, but I stopped her. "Maya, sit down." She paused, looking at me with curiosity. She sat in the chair opposite my desk, the chair where Damon should have sat if he had been a different man. "What is it, Ray?" she asked. "Is something wrong with the numbers?" "The numbers are perfect," I said. "That is the problem." I walked over to the safe in the corner of the room. I dialed the combination. Click, click, click. I pulled out a small velvet box and a thick envelope. I walked back and placed them in front of her. "I am 73 years old, Maya," I said. "I have spent my entire life chasing the next mile. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed the sound of my wife singing in the shower because I was on the phone yelling about shipping rates." I touched the envelope. "I fought for this company because it was my creation," I continued. "But a creator has to know when to stop painting and let the art stand on its own." "Ray, what are you saying?" Maya asked, her voice quiet. "I am saying that I am tired," I said. "Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a mountain for 40 years. I pushed the envelope toward her. "This is the deed to the company," I said. "Or rather, 51% of the voting stock." Maya's eyes went wide. She started to shake her head. "Ray, I can't accept this. This is your legacy. This is for your family." "You are my family," I said, cutting her off. I looked her in the eye. "Family isn't whose blood you have, Maya. It is whose hand you hold when the world is ending. You stood by me when my own son was trying to bury me. You fought for my name when everyone else was laughing at it. You are the daughter I never had. And you are the only person on this earth I trust with this steering wheel." I opened the velvet box. Inside was a simple silver key. The key to the executive washroom, the key to the master safe, and the key to the front door. "I am appointing you CEO effective immediately," I said. "I will stay on as chairman of the board. I will come in once a month to drink coffee and complain about the music you kids listen to. But the decisions, the daily grind, that is yours now." Maya looked at the key. I saw tears welling up in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of being seen, of being valued. "I won't let you down, Ray," she whispered. "I know you won't," I said. "Because if you do, I know a very good lawyer who can sue you." We both laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound. I stood up and grabbed my coat. It was a new coat, a bomber jacket like the one I wore in the service. "Where are you going?" Maya asked, wiping her eyes. "I have a date," I said. "A date?" She raised an eyebrow. "With a very classy lady," I said, winking. I walked out of the office. I walked past the cubicles where people were working hard, where they waved at me with genuine smiles, not the fearful glances of Damon's rain. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. And there she was. My 1968 Cadillac DeVille. I had bought her back from the police auction. It had cost me double what she was worth, but I didn't care. I had spent 3 months restoring her. I had scrubbed every inch of Damon's presence out of the leather. I had tuned the engine until it purred like a jungle cat. She was pristine white again, shining under the dusk light. I slid into the driver's seat. The smell of old leather and gasoline hit me. It was the smell of freedom. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated in my chest. I put the top down. I wanted the wind in my face. I drove out of the gate, leaving the empire behind me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove west toward the hills where the city noise faded into the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the trees. I drove to the cemetery. It was quiet there, peaceful. I parked the Cadillac under an old oak tree. I walked up the winding path, my cane tapping softly on the stones. I reached the plot on the hill, the one with the best view of the sunset. Beatrice Bishop, beloved wife, eternal soul. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. I cleaned a few fallen leaves off the headstone. I kept my promise. "B," I said aloud to the wind. I fixed it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was from the morning edition of the City Chronicle. The headline read, "Tycoon establishes multi-million-dollar scholarship fund for underprivileged engineers." I placed the clipping on the grass next to the fresh lilies I had brought. "It is done," I said. The Beatrice Bishop Scholarship. Full tuition for 50 kids a year. Kids like me. Kids who have grease under their fingernails and big dreams but no money. I sat down on the stone bench next to her grave. "Damon is in prison, B," I said, my voice dropping. 5 years, minimum security. I don't visit him. Not yet. He writes to me. He says he is learning to work in the library. He says he is reading the books I used to try to make him read. I looked at the horizon where the sun was dipping below the line of the earth. "Maybe in 5 years he will be a man I can talk to," I said. "Maybe not. But that is his journey now. I can't walk it for him." I felt a sudden lightness in my chest. For a year I had carried the guilt of putting my own son in jail. I had wondered if I was a monster, if I was unnatural. But sitting there with the ghost of my wife, I realized the truth. I didn't lose a son. I saved him. I stopped him from becoming a permanent villain. I stopped him from destroying his soul completely. I gave him the only thing that could possibly redeem him, consequences. And as for me, I looked at my hands. They were old hands, spotted and scarred. But they were open. They weren't clutching anything anymore. I wasn't holding on to anger. I wasn't holding on to the company. I wasn't holding on to the past. I was free. I stood up. The wind ruffled my gray hair. "I love you, B," I whispered. "Save a seat for me." But not yet. I have a lot of driving to do. I walked back to the Cadillac. I climbed in and turned on the radio. A jazz station was playing Coltrane. The saxophone wailed into the night, mournful and triumphant at the same time. I put the car in gear. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't go back to the empty mansion. I turned onto the highway heading toward the coast. I had never seen the Pacific Ocean. I decided it was time. As the city lights faded behind me, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the chapter where I was the victim. The next chapter, that was going to be about the man who survived. I pressed the gas pedal. The Cadillac leaped forward, devouring the road. I was Ray Bishop. I was 73, and I was just getting started. I spent 40 years building an empire thinking I was leaving a legacy for my blood. But I learned the hard way that DNA doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sitting at the same table doesn't make you family. True family are the ones who stand by you when your pockets are empty, not the ones who count your money while you sleep. I didn't lose a son in that courtroom. I lost a parasite and gained my dignity back. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing, even if you built that bridge yourself. If you enjoyed this story and believe that respect is earned, not inherited, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories of truth and justice. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough choice to protect your peace? I read every single one. See you in the next video. Stay strong.